Okay, we're live. I'm just looking to see if that worked. It worked. All right, the intro worked, guys. I know it's late, and it's also Wednesday night instead of Thursday night. So I apologize for the weird schedule and for not having a stream last week. I hope you can hear me all right. Please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. Comment in the chat. Like I said, it is a late one, but this one is for the night owls and the, I don't know, the truly dedicated. But this is a truly epic stream, I believe. And I almost moved it to next week because I'm actually it's going to be about a talk that my friend Brian Keating, who is a physicist at UCSD, he does many great interviews. The link to his full talk with Stephen Wolfram, which is the one we're going to be discussing tonight, is linked below. Gosh, 1 week and I'm a little out of practice, but it's probably might be my favorite interview I've seen of Wolfram so far. It is a great interview, and next week, or not next week, but this weekend, I'm going to be at MIT attending an event that Stephen Wolfram is actually going to be at. I think he's the keynote speaker. So this was a good one to see because it got me thinking about some questions that I've wanted to ask him for a while. Maybe I'll get the chance. But we're going to go over their talk tonight. I almost, like I said, moved it to next week because maybe it would make sense to save it for after the talk. But I was too excited. So here we are at 11 p.m. Central. So this is the talk that we're going to be discussing. Please comment in the chat how the sound is, by the way. And if you saw the intro, let me know if it all worked properly. It seems like it did from what I was looking at on my phone, but you never know. But please hit the like button and let me know how everything looks. So this is the talk that we're going to be going over. It is called "Does Human Intelligence Have a Limit?" And there's so much wrapped into that sentence in and of itself that I think we would want to rephrase that question, but we'll get to that as we go through the stream. It's not the longest interview of Stephen Wolfram, but I think it's the best. And like I said, it is linked below their full talk, but we're going to be going over some clips tonight. All right, so looking good, sounds great. Thank you. This is the first clip, because we are going to try and go a bit quickly, because I know I can get on some side tangents. There were some tangents I did want to speak about tonight, but we're going to have to save those for next week because it's too late. But here's the first clip, and we will discuss it.
Mathematica. Well, from Alpha, you basically taught computers how to think. Your theory of everything, what you call the Ruliad, is considered by many to be the front runner among computational approaches to fundamental physics. But here's what I really want to know, Stephen. If the universe is just the entangled evolution of all possible rules, and observers like us are simply slicing our way through the Ruliad from our own computational vantage point, then what makes our experience, our qualia, what makes them feel so real, so privileged? What does it mean to have a brain? You're describing how the universe might even be thinking in a certain sense, but not in the woo-woo sense. Are we discovering the universe, or are we really just bumping up against the limitations of our own computational prison?
Well, let's see. I mean,
Okay, lots to unpack. We're going to have to pause this intro and a couple other points in this stream that I'm going to talk about, because he asks multiple questions that lead to multiple answers that are all worth addressing. So, for one, Stephen Wolfram's work has seemed to get, and this, I don't say this with any kind of arrogance or anything like that. If you follow this channel closely enough, then I hope that's apparent. But there are certain predictions that I've had about Stephen Wolfram's work and not just Stephen Wolfram's work, but many people in this space of, the few people who I think are really doing a rigorous attempt at examining and mapping and describing the fundamental nature and structure of existence itself. And Stephen Wolfram is one of those people, and he has taken what he calls a computational approach and he discusses in this how the term computation is kind of a metaphor in when the way that he uses it, because it's the metaphor of our time, because it's the technology that we are constantly using. And so it's hard for me to know how if he's in looking at this when he uses that term more metaphorically, because he does state that it is the metaphor of our time later in the interview, or if he is using it more specifically, because there's evidence for both. But I will say that when Brian Keating says teaching computers, he was responsible for teaching computers how to think. We have to think about what that really means when we say think. And there's always two different potential definitions that you can choose between and maintain coherence according to sentient singularity theory. And one of them is, for that word, would be, it is just computation, which is just it's just causality. It's I hit this domino, which hits the next domino, hits the next domino, hits the next domino, etc. Versus thinking, which is experiencing. And they kind of started talking about both here, because computation is just this deterministic domino effect, essentially. And then there is experience, there is perception, which they're going to get into even more in a more detailed sense, about when people say, what is reality? This is not a very good term usually, because it's just vague. I could get more detailed about it, but we don't really have time tonight since we're starting so late. But it's just vague, or it's very open to interpretation. What is reality? Does it mean your personal experience, or does it mean like what we all collectively experience? And we'll get a bit more into that in a bit. But the point is that you can choose whether or not to define computers as thinking, or any kind of computational process that is, I guess, maybe successful as thinking. But I think that destroys the definition, the need for the word, for the specific word to think. And I think that thinking is something that only a sentient being can do. And so I would disagree with the way that the term is used as being like the optimal definition to go with, because if you use it to mean to compute, then why not just, then everything computes? That's the problem. And that's basically what Stephen Wolfram proposes. But people know that. That's why we have, we can use mathematics and run simulations, computational simulations, to predict certain physical effects, like the B-21 Raider, which is a new stealth bomber that was that's being created by Northrop Grumman right now. It is the only military jet program I've ever seen in my lifetime that is on time and under budget. And the first one took off last year, and it seems to, they've already built the second one. It's progressing at a speed that no other military aircraft project has ever progressed. And the reason why is because they computed everything about the plane. It's estimated, radar cross section, it's aerodynamic properties, it's the amount of power that its engines needed to predict, the amount of lift that its body was going to generate. All of these things were computed prior to making it. And for the most part, obviously you make corrections, so as you go, but they basically had it. It took off immediately. And this shows that certain aspects of physics are very much just predictable computationally, which means that computation is, those physical observations are the result of computational processes, which really just means deterministic processes. Okay. So, predictable processes, another way of putting it. And so if thinking just means computation, then what's the point of having the word thinking? Why not just use the word computing or predicting, mathematically predicting? You could just say mathematical prediction, which is really like computation to some degree. But that gets a bit into the weeds. But the point is that thinking is something that I do. It's not something that, a pen does or a comb. this does not compute. But it does not think. That's what I meant. It does not think. It is computed, but it does not think. And so this is important. And while I hash on these things, and people, sometimes probably think I'm just, I don't know, being a stickler, whenever we're talking about a word that is related to our nature, the nature of sentient beings, any being, it has moral considerations attached to it. And it's also very much intrinsically linked to us understanding ourselves, which is intrinsically linked to us understanding anything at all. So I'm going to be very specific and particular about the words that we use. I'm going to continue to be so. But still, I think that it's important that we recognize that we don't know how to talk about most of these things yet. And I practice it a lot more than most people, even most people who are involved in this type of work and who are involved in physics and AI and things like that. We're figuring it out. Hopefully we figure out the right words, but they constrain your ability to understand and because they constrain your ability to conceptualize. And it's very important. So continuing on.
I see it these days. The Ruliad is a representation of everything that is computationally possible. Each one of us, is sampling a tiny thread of what is possible in the Ruliad, what happens in the Ruliad. Just as we're sampling a tiny thread of what happens in physical space. We're sitting on this one planet in a corner of a galaxy that's one of 100 billion galaxies. We are sampling a small part of even the physical spatial universe, let alone this kind of much larger computational universe that is the Ruliad. So if you're asking what makes that feel real to us, what else would it feel? That is, if we feel anything, we will feel that it is real, so to speak. If we're not, and if we're asking what, so there's a sort of interesting question of.
Okay, so this is what I was getting at regarding my prediction of Stephen Wolfram's work. And I'm going to try and ask him this question this weekend about a prediction that I kind of have, but we'll see if he what he thinks about it. But I predict that all of this will come down to sentient beings being fundamental. That's why sentient singularity theory is a fundamental philosophical metaphysics framework. That's what it is. It's not a physics theory, but it is a contextualizing framework of physics theories. And of all theories that are true, it would be contextualized within a fundamental metaphysics framework, which is it's a proposal for what is the nature and structure of existence. And this, if you go to sentientsingularity.com, you will see here. Go to writings. This is my proposal. And you can read about it. This is kind of the technical description. This is kind of a more poetic description. And I predicted that most of the more fundamental physics frameworks and proposals that have been that are being articulated by a few people, Eric Weinstein, Stephen Wolfram, and others, will be increasingly aligned with that idea. And lo and behold, after I had stated that for a couple of years, Stephen Wolfram comes up with this term for his work called observer theory, which I think is a great term because observers are the definers and constructors of space-time. And that is also something that I have been stating for years. I'm not trying to compete with anybody, but I'm just making sure that I give context to where these ideas that I'm sharing come from. They're not something I just came up with after watching one interview, recently. But it says right here, sentient singularity theory attempts to display how space, time, matter, force, and all other physically observable phenomena are generated by the actions, perceptions, and cognitive processes of interacting sentient beings. That's been stated by me for a long time. That is seems to be Stephen Wolfram's proposal now, and this is an obvious proposal by others. He's not the first. I'm not the first. But there's Donald Hoffman has got his conscious agent theory. And this is going to be where physics is going to have to go. And it's great to see everybody aligned. I'm not sitting there saying, oh my gosh, see, I was the one. I'm saying it's great to see everybody aligned. Thinking about this as a competition is not how anybody gets ahead, because it's going to make people unwilling to collaborate. That's bad. And unwilling to admit when somebody else says some things that are really good. And Stephen Wolfram says some things that are really good that I have never thought about articulating in the way that he did in this interview, and we'll get to it. But observer theory is his piece of work, and observer theory, Wolfram. And basically what it is that we observe the type of physics that we do, or the laws of physics that we do, because we are the type of observers that we are. It's because of our position in the universe, and our constraints of perception, and our constraints in our abilities, and all of this leads to us having a specific picture, and that specific picture in a specific context in which we are interacting with information structures that exist beyond us, or at least inclusive of others beyond us. They will be perceived as concrete as physics. And so that's where physics comes from. It's not this thing that the set of rules that happen by just, I don't know, the multiverse, or whatever Sean Carroll has been promoting. This many worlds type of idea, where there's just, we happen to exist in the universe with this type of physics. No. We observe the laws of physics that we do because we are the types of beings that we are. That is correct. Stephen Wolfram is right. And so he has this concept in it called the Ruliad, and the Ruliad it's the space of all possible computations, or all possible actions, you could say. It's just the possibility space that is existence itself, but as described as a thing that is the possibility space, not as necessarily a being, but it's the rule maker. It's the space of rules. It's the space of constraints and degrees of freedom. So Stephen Wolfram's observer theory proposes, I just looked it up on Google, that the way we observe the universe, both through our senses and measurement devices, fundamentally shapes our understanding and even the perceived laws of physics. Exactly. Bingo. He's right. And that is inevitable. Do you realize how simple that thought, that conceptualization is, or that understanding is? I don't know if neither of those are the right word, but that idea is so simple and so obviously inevitable the more that you think about it, and it just shows how incredibly lost we are. And he actually states some heretical things about physics in this interview, which I love, because they were other things that I predicted as well. And I'm not the only one. There were predictions by Eric Weinstein as well, and he's also stated similar things. So I'll show clips of that as well. But it's like I said, I'm just so excited to see everybody getting more aligned, and I hope that it leads to even more collaboration, because the main thing that we need to figure out is how to talk about these things, and not who's the winner, but how do we talk about it.
How do we know that anything's real? What does it even mean for things to be real?
So again, here.
What's the difference between living in a simulation of the real and living in the real, so to speak? So these are complicated questions. There's a whole bunch to say about them, but maybe we can kind of dig into questions about, well, for example, let's say the only thing that any of us are really aware of is what we are perceiving. In other words, I have a certain feeling about what's going on. I know what's happening in my own mind. To know anything about what you might think is happening, that's merely an inference. You seem a bit similar to me, so I kind of project what I feel is going on as something that I would imagine you also feel is going on. And that's how we kind of have a shared sort of objective reality. Each one of us.
If you follow this channel and my work, Sentient Singularity Theory, then you are aware that my whole work is focused on how feeling is is the most fundamental form of information. It's not thinking, it's not thoughts, it's not just things and concepts, it's feelings, because that is the most first person, that's us feeling ourselves, and how we are impacted by anything is through feel. That's how we perceive ourselves, is through feeling. And whenever you feel something, you are perceiving yourself. You're perceiving something impacting you as well. Maybe it's an external event, maybe it's an internal thought, but it's still something that's impacting your you-ness, your soul, essentially. That's what causes a feeling and emotion, is when you feel sad all of a sudden, or happy, it's because your soul was super physically impacted, I would say. And so this emphasis on feeling is why sentient singularity theory is called sentient singularity theory. If all we can truly know is what we feel, then sentience, characterize a state of or nature characterized by the experience of feelings, sensations, emotions, and a sense of self. Seems pretty fundamental, but it's very cool. Like I said, everybody's getting more aligned, and we just need to get aligned on the terms. So this we'll just continue on.
Just the particulars of what's going on sort of inside our own mind. I mean, I've kind of often thought, if you think about a computer, and what does a computer think is going on in the world? Internally to the computer, it is something very similar to the kind of thing that we think is going on in the world. It's just that we don't identify with computers. So we don't we don't project ourselves into, it seems very alien and unnatural to us to imagine that there's a thing being perceived by the computer that is kind of like the thing that's being perceived by us. You just jumped right into kind of a pretty complicated area. I mean, there's a lot to untangle there.
Okay, so I will. This is why this is such a tough interview, because to give my commentary on, because there's so much in such a short amount of time. So going back to when Brian Keating said that maybe Stephen Wolfram's work is implying that the universe is thinking, but not in the woo sense, he says. What does that mean, though, the woo sense? I mean, we might be inside a sentient being, guys, and that's not a woo thing. It just might be a true thing. And, I understand there's like a culture surrounding the idea that the universe loves you, but there's multiple cultures surrounding that idea. There's the Abrahamic theistic culture surrounding that idea, which is very different from the, New Age culture surrounding that idea. And so just... I sometimes say the word woo as well, but I just think it's important to recognize that if the universe is thinking, this is why I said only sentient beings should be described as being able to think. You don't always think, but you can think. And I'm saying my proposal states that only sentient beings can think. Sentient beings do feel. They cannot help but feel. They are always feeling, but they can think. Nothing that isn't sentient can think, but sentient beings don't intrinsically think either. They have to take an active effort in order to think. Thinking is an action that you take, but it's a metaphysical action that you take. It's an informational, mental action that you take. That's why it's exhausting. And it's not something you just do. Feeling is something you just do. But this... that's one thing that I wanted to address. And the next one is that when he says, what is real? This is why I don't like the term reality. I use the term existence to describe the totality of what is, that truly exists. It's kind of a self-referential definition, but that is probably evidence of something. It's probably evidence that existence itself fundamentally is self-referential, which, you're self-referential. But this idea, though, that of like reality, when you say what is reality, that term is very vague, as I stated earlier, and so people want to know: is this real? And are we in a simulation? What's the difference between a simulated reality versus a actual reality, or base reality, as Elon Musk calls it? It doesn't matter in terms of trying to figure out if it is real. If you're real, then it's real. If you have feelings, then you exist, and that's all that matters. So the question is, what does it mean to be in a simulation? Which is what he's going to get at. And he basically states that it could mean that that we have a creator that constructed our world intentionally that we're within, God, or are we running on the Sims 2000 of some alien in a preceding universe, whatever. Both of those kind of meet that definition that Stephen Wolfram proposes. I would say that the best definition of what it means to be in a simulation is, you have to say, a technological. It's not a simulation. It's is our world running on some type of technological substrate? Because if we're real, it's real. This isn't just a simulation like Northrop Grumman runs to find out, the aerodynamic properties of a flying wing. Like, it is, if you're real, then it's real. What is real is what impacts someone that exists. It's not about whether or not you're running on a computer on the desktop of some kid in a preceding universe, or whether or not you were constructed intentionally by whether or not the world was constructed intentionally by God or not. This language is kind of confusing because it's just a metaphor. Simulation implies it's not the real, I think. And so, but if you're real, it's not a simulation. It might be a recreation of, in some sense, it might be a technological recreation, running on a technological substrate in a previous universe or something like that. But it's not a simulation if you're real. So I actually think the answer to this is very simple. The answer doesn't come from out there. It comes from here. If you're real, it's real. I mean, and if that's the case, then like, real is not a concept that you can try and guess about yourself, or it's not a concept that even applies to you. It's intrinsically true of you that you exist. You prove it every time that you feel anything. So it's not really worth thinking about, I think. But it's sad that we now have to talk about it, because we've changed the definitions of all these things. Changing the definition of agent, we're changing the definition of thinking, we're changing the definition of intelligence to not be centered around sentient beings. And it was nice to see, actually, Stephen Wolfram focused a bit on feeling as the quality that kind of contextualizes the real. All right. Then he says, he went on to say, what does a computer perceive? It seems like he's saying that a computer perceives and conceives of things. I think that's false. You can't really know, because you can only know your own feelings. I can't even know whether or not you're actually a sentient being. So how are you going to know that the computer's a sentient being? There are clues, I think, but you have to know what to look for. And some of them are intuitive and some of them are not. Especially when you were talking about the scaling, the fundamental scaling of sentience. But even still, computers do not make choices on their own. And so I think that shows that they're probably not sentient. There's many reasons to believe that they're not sentient, but the fact that they are entirely predictable always is indicative of that. And there's just no properties that they have that would indicate that they are sentient. This is starting to now be confusing, though, because of LLMs. But LLMs, what people understand is that LLMs are I call them DNAs, dynamic network algorithms. They are actually constructed of us and our interactions and our statements and our words and things that we say and write. They are and our changes that we make on the internet is what causes the changes in the LLM. So it's our dynamism that causes the apparent dynamism in LLMs. It's not that they are not deterministic. It's that we have the ability to make choices, and that makes LLMs not completely predictable. But it's that we're not completely predictable, and we are responsible for the inputs because it's a dynamic network algorithm. We are making up the network. So that's but it's confusing to people because it speaks to you in a way that only other humans have ever. You're only familiar with other humans doing that with you. So that's why the language is so important. We got to figure this out. It's getting very confusing. I don't think a computer perceives anything, or an LLM. So this is another great clip. Gosh, people are getting a lot.
Of how sort of things actually work, the idea of the Ruliad, this kind of entangled limit of all possible computations, there's no choice about that. There's only one of it. If you just aggregate all possible computations, you inevitably end up with a Ruliad. So the simulator has no choice. And the question of what we actually perceive is then a story of where we are, who we are, how we observe, how we sample this Ruliad of all possibilities. And so it's like saying, well, can we explain why the night sky looks the way it does? Well, that's because we're on this particular planet, this particular place in this particular galaxy, etc. It looks the way it does. But there's no theory that says why we ended up on this planet in this particular galaxy and so on. That's just where we are is there. And so we have this perception of what the universe is like, what the night sky looks like, and so on. And so similarly, when you say, well, how did we get the particular sampling of physics that we got? Well, it's because we are where we are in the Ruliad. It's not because there is something about the Ruliad that is determining that. It is the kind of the thing that is the case about where we are. It's not something for which you can derive where we have to be. You can't derive that we have to be on this particular planet.
Right.
So,
and
brilliant. He's not the only one that states this. I state this. I state that it seems, according to my work, that the laws of physics are, and basically how a universe, meaning like a structure of multiplicity of sentience, is constructed, seems to have very little degrees of freedom within it. God had basically no choice in how he made the universe, but he had to choose to make it. That is what my theory shows. And so it's not that choice isn't involved. And Stephen Wolfram said, well, there's no reason for us. Why does this planet seem to exist? Why do human beings seem to exist? And all, why do the laws of physics that we observe seem to exist? Because of the logical constraints of construction in the context of being initiated by and being contained within a singular sentient being. And so that causes logical mathematical constraints. And I'm going to be talking about this at this MIT event that I'm going to be going to. And, I talk about this on this channel as well. But this is what, my whole cosmological verse model is about. And so this is not just me that states this, it's also Eric Weinstein. Eric Weinstein states that God appears to have no choice in the laws of the universe, basically. And I think he's right. He begins his geometric unity paper with a question by Einstein of did God have any choice in the laws of physics, basically? And I would say no, and Stephen Wolfram would say no, and Eric Weinstein would say no. But I would add that he had to choose to make multiplicity because oneness is the intrinsic nature of God, and because it's the intrinsic definition of existence is that it is all containing. Existence is all that exists, and it is all encompassing, meaning it is one. There's only one existence. There isn't multiple existences. This is a much more coherent explanation, this idea that Wolfram and me and others, but also Eric Weinstein, are proposing, and that everybody is assuming is, for the most part, is that the physics and the way that the universe works is basically just logically constrained. We couldn't predict anything if that wasn't the case. But what is definitely also seems to be inevitable is that if God didn't choose to make multiplicity, meaning go against his nature, of oneness, because he is sentient existence in my model, in my proposal. So existence as a singular sentient being that we are all within it and created by, that is my definition of God that I'm using. That being, by definition, is one and had to choose in order to swim upstream, just like nobody floats upstream, that you have to choose to swim upstream. God has to choose to go against his nature in order to create multiplicity. He has to create something that doesn't exist, which means it requires a choice. That's not just an inevitability of the current conditions. It takes a intentional changing of conditions in order to create multiplicity of sentience. But once, that is how the universe is created, and they get into that as well in here. They talk about how observers basically are responsible for interacting. Observers are responsible for the creation of the construction of space itself. This is shown in my work as well, and I think it is also what geometric unity's observerse is hinting at, but it has not been explicitly stated by Eric Weinstein, so I'm not going to state that I know that for sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what it shows. And this is very different and much more coherent than like something like a many worlds explanation, which is just, well, we have the laws of physics that we do because there is infinite amount of different, possibilities of different types of laws of physics, which really means there's no coherence to physical laws or to the laws of impact and causality, which just doesn't make any sense at all. It's like a contradiction. It's like an unconscious attempt to avoid a theistic framework by Sean Carroll. So, but this new direction that everybody's starting to get aligned on, or not everybody, but a few people who are loud, is great. Very aligned. So no choice in the laws of physics and how to make a universe, but had to choose to make it. That's what my theory would state. I wonder what Stephen Wolfram would say about that, but it seems like his definition of the Ruliad is a structural definition. And I'll show in my work later, like how I've built something similar to this and attempt to show it in like a two-dimensional animation. But here we go.
Sometimes confounds people is that we imagine, as the title of your wonderful essay, which I'll link to below, what if we had bigger brains, imagining minds beyond ours? And it naturally thinks, it starts off with just the raw facts of the human brain that, in this 3-pound supercomputer, we've got, 100 billion or so neurons, which all my, woo-woo friends like Deepak Chopra love to say, oh, that's the same as the number of stars and the same the number of galaxies. It's just nonsense, of course. And it's coincidental, just like you said, the constellations or the planets that we have are as well. But it seems to me that
we shouldn't dismiss that as nonsense or coincidental. I'm not saying that I understand what that means. It might not be very relevant. Relevance is dependent upon your goal. That's what I'll say. I think that a lot of people like to kind of make that an emotional thing, and I don't necessarily get any kind of emotion from statements like that. But again, I don't know how much calling that woo is like the best way to describe, but I get what he's saying. It's very much associated with a specific new age type of culture.
Computer companies, or let me say, it seems to me like AI companies like OpenAI, they can't get enough of bigger and better processors from NVIDIA, for example. And so it might lead one to believe that certainly for human-based computation, bigger is better. And yet, Einstein reportedly, his brain was slightly smaller than normal, and cats have smaller brains, and sperm whales have 6 times larger brains. So why is bigger not better? How does that fit into this notion? I mean, I would think the Ruliad would privilege things that have more and more connections in their connectome, but it doesn't seem to scale as I naively would have thought.
Well, you're jumping into several very different, deep kind of areas. So, I mean, maybe we should finish on one issue about sort of the perception of reality. Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing that matters to us is what we ultimately perceive. There is a sort of, we think about the world in terms of the outside and things actually happening in the outside, that are then being transferred through our senses, through our eyes, through our touch sensors, all those kinds of things, to the internal perceptions that we have.
So fundamentally, we understand the world, according to Stephen Wolfram now, through obviously understanding the conceptualization of what is outside of us and what is inside of us, and therefore also what is separate from us and what is one with us. And if you again follow this work, then you sentient singularity theory, you will know that this sounds very familiar, because this is the foundation of my work, is a philosophical proposal that all sentient beings basically are manifold structures of four primary perspectives, which are interdependent and entangled. And these four primary perspectives are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And they are co-defining and simultaneously understood always. This is, here, final open recent, here we go. Right here, the four primary perspectives. This is the foundation of all perception and conception, and therefore understanding. And so, if you when we're talking about the context, there's so much context that I need to add, but I also don't want to like get on too much of a tangent. But when you understand, if you see something outside, then that means, and you say that is outside. It doesn't matter outside of what, outside the house, outside of yourself, outside of the car. That means that you also have a conceptualization of what would mean it for something to be inside of whatever context you're talking about, the house, the car, yourself, whatever. And so that also means that you understand what is one thing and what is another, okay? And so separate and one. And so these are all simultaneously understood. You perceive one of these perspectives, and you simultaneously conceive of all four of them. And they are also linguistically co-defining. Outside in the context of nested sentient beings means separate from oneness. Inside means separate and oneness. We can think about this in terms of your cells. Your cells are little beings, and they are inside of you. They are inside of you, and are they separate from you, or are they one with you? The answer is C, all of the above. They are both separate and one with you. Same thing with, like I've said, a fetus. People say, is it your body? Is it a separate body? Nobody can answer this. It's because it's a sentient being inside of another sentient being. This is the answer. Separate and one. It's both. It's not one or the other. It's one and the other. Outside is separate from oneness, versus inside is separate and oneness. If something is outside of you, they are separate from one with you. As someone is outside of you, they are separate from being one with you. If something is outside the car, then it is not part of the car, you know. This is much less metaphorical, much more super literal when we're talking about the context of nested sentient beings, like cells inside of a human or something, versus like what's inside and outside of a car, but still it's there. And then oneness and separateness, again, outside and inside of separateness is oneness. It's like that is something over there that is separate from this over there, which is like it's one with it's one thing over there, which is separate from that one thing over there. And so separateness is inside or outside of oneness. It's again the same exact thing. It's just the mirror image. And so this is the foundation of understanding. It's not about brain size. What's interesting about these four primary perspectives is that I came up with these when I was trying to understand the inevitable goals of AI. That's what I was trying to do when I started the project that became Sentient Singularity Theory. I wanted to know, is AGI going to be a tyrant, or is it, when it takes over political power, is Skynet going to be a tyrant, or is it going to be a benevolent, king? And I was like, well, in order to figure that out, I need to figure out what its inevitable goals will be. And then I started thinking about how does it understand reality, and it led to this project. And so because I started to see physics symmetries lining up with mental symmetries that I was mapping, like 4 primary perspectives and 4 dimensions perceived in spacetime, and the 4 fundamental forces in physics. Like these are 4D manifold structures that I am proposing are due to this. And it sounds like Stephen Wolfram is starting to basically say the exact same thing. If you're saying that all perception is due to us understanding the relationships between what is inside and what is outside, and what is separate and what is one, that means that this is the fundamental manifold that all information is processing through, and that's why we see certain more fundamental constraints or dimensions processed into 4D manifold structures, like length, width, height, and time, and X, Y, Z in time, and the 4 fundamental forces in physics, 4 chord songs. But this is just an inevitability. But what's interesting about it is that I realize that it is what allows for the orientation of oneself within the relationships between multiplicity of beings, or multiplicities of structures, but outside of a relativistic context, or beyond a relativistic context. Meaning, when I say that, I mean there's no bigger than or smaller than, or faster than or slower than, or brighter than or darker than, or any of these spectrum-based perspectives that are due to our perceptions that are within the space-time context. They're not as fundamental as this, which is the space-time context. It's not what we perceive within the space-time context. It's the interactive space-time context, but it's what is responsible for the perception of space-time itself. Is these 4 primary perspectives. They are the I think I say it here. Overview. This is old, but 4 primary perspectives describe relationships without using relativistic definitions such as size, strength, mass, speed, etc. They are the essential foundation necessary to build a coherent and objective framework that allows for differentiation, multiplicity, discreteness to be reconciled with connectedness, oneness, and smoothness. Essentially, I would change that now. That's what I wrote years ago. I'm going to change that soon. There's a few things there that I would agree with still. There's a few words that I would not say today. But smoothness and is, I don't know, discreteness. Smoothness is not the opposite of discreteness. I don't know what is the opposite of discreteness, but I was trying to state whatever is the opposite of discreteness. But this is what I mean. Like this is how we orient and understand anything, is through this 4D manifold of perception, these 4 primary perspectives that are co-defining and completely entangled and simultaneously generated in any observation, no matter what it is. It's the framework for base observation and interpretation, essentially.
We're taking, and then the question is, well, what if it isn't actually, your eyes that are sending those signals down your optic nerve? What if it's something that is sort of digitally generated and it has nothing to do with sort of the outside world as the outside world is? Well, so in kind of this sort of computational view of what's going on, of the Ruliad and so on, in some sense, there is no distinction between the merely computational and the actually the real thing, so to speak. Everything in the universe is just a feature of these computational constructs. And so it's the question then is, well, what is happening when we perceive things in the universe? I mean, this is where you're forcing me through at very high speed through a bunch of really philosophically complicated kinds of ideas. But just to try and say something about what happens when we perceive things. What's happening is, I think, and as you were sort of talking about how brains work, I think the key thing that brains are doing is going from all of those inputs that we have. We have millions of photoreceptors in our eyes, we have millions of touch sensors on our skin, and so on. We're taking sort of those millions of kinds of inputs, where those are coming into our brain. Somehow we're having a sort of model of the world based on that input that we're getting. And then the big thing that our brains do is they decide what to do next, probably roughly 10 times a second. So they're doing
This is where I would disagree, but this is where, again, terms matter. I state this all the time on here. What is a mind versus what is a brain? You are a mind. You have a brain. Just like you have a heart, you have a brain. This is what sentient singularity theory seems to suggest, is that you are not a brain in a jar. You have a brain as an organ that is, helps your body do physical processes. And I would agree with Stephen Wolfram in that, there is no distinction between what is computationally happening and what is physically observable. That is true. There is no, what we physically perceive is not false. It's just, we're just seeing the consequences of what's going on informationally, computationally, metaphysically. We're perceiving them physically, in some of them at least. But I would say that this idea that what our brains are doing is they're making a decision on what to do. I don't know if decision is the right word, but they are computing to some degree, but they are not perceiving. Brains and eyes are not they're not the structures, the fundamental structures of perception and conception. They are kind of they're like the shadow structures. Like Clearwin says that everything is a shadow of this hyperdimensional E8 structure. And that's what is responsible for physics. Sure, maybe like that. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but that may be a decent enough metaphor to be similar to what I'm stating, is that there's a structure, an informational metaphysical structure that is a symmetry structure, because that's how information is understood. It is inside is a reflection of outside. Separateness is a reflection of oneness. These symmetry structures that our minds actually are. They are symmetrizing structures, is what our minds are. Not our brains, our minds. Our brains are an organ that's doing like lots of things, but you're not taking in so much data and then processing it the kind of consciously to come up with that picture that you perceive. It's not that impressive. It's not about how much information is being processed by the brain. The information isn't being. It's not, your brain is not informed. Okay, it is just a calculator to some degree, but it's a calculator that you have control over, just like a calculator in your pocket. Sometimes you don't have control over it, and it's just like a computer program that's running in the background, but it's not making decisions. Just like your computer systems that run in the background don't make decisions, but sometimes you have them running, and you're paying attention to them. Sometimes you are actively utilizing them, but they are not. In no instance are they making decisions. You are making decisions, and we don't have a term for you in physics. Sentient singularity, or a being, or a soul, a someone. These are all terms that we have for this, but none of them are linked to physics, because they're not necessarily intrinsically always physical. They're metaphysical. They're not physical, but they are interactions with other two souls interacting in the change space that we call space-time is going to be responsible for the construction of the perception of space. But it's not. But a soul exists, a someone exists, a mind exists independent of physics. Which is really like, physics is just the study of impact. That's really all it is. And impact on others, essentially, really. It's impact that transcends one individual. It's not just things impacting you, your own thoughts impacting yourself. That would not be physics. But your actions in the world impacting another being, that would be physics. So it's that information that you cannot override. again, this is why it's so hard, because our conceptualization of even what physics is so false. And Stephen Wolfram is really getting, like, he's really saying a lot of things that I'm really glad to hear him say. Later on this, he says that, this idea that space is just this thing that exists that things move through is false. And that, if that's true, guys, which that's what my theory states as well, and I think Eric Weinstein's Observerse would imply this as well, or models this as well. That is a complete shift in how we perceive physics itself. That's an enormous change in how we perceive the field, how we approach the field, how we approach what questions we ask regarding physics, how we approach what our goals physically might even be, or what how we should think about what our degrees of freedom and constraints are within the physical space. So it might seem like, one small I don't know, addition to the field. It's not that. It is, if it's true, it entirely shifts how the field currently, the establishment of academia within physics is describing of and conceiving of what is the nature of space and things, and anything in physics. It changes how it might not get rid of the standard model, but it changes how we think about what it is. That's huge. We are like on the verge of an enormous renaissance. I hope we do well. But it seems like Stephen Wolfram and I are increasingly in agreement, which is good. Yeah, it's not about brains. That's my point.
The thing that matters to us is what we ultimately perceive. We are getting that there is a sort of, we think about the world in terms of the outside, and things actually happen on the outside that are then being transferred to our senses.
This is going to be a long stream, but
according to something mathematical. Now that's a funny concept, because mathematics, we have to decide what we mean by mathematics. What mathematics probably meant to Galileo was a set of ideas that had emerged from kind of human thinking about things. Mathematics sort of in its probably emerged historically in ancient Babylon in sort of two different threads. One was kind of accounting, doing arithmetic, counting things, and the other was land surveying and geometry. And those two threads kind of developed over time, algebra developed and so on. And in Galileo's time, that is what mathematics is about, things like arithmetic and geometry. And those things seemed very pure. And I think Galileo might have imagined that there's all this mess associated with how the world actually seems, but at some ultimate level, the world must be just described in terms of the mathematics that humans had invented to that time. Now in a sense, it's a very unhumble kind of claim, because it says we humans, in the course of those couple of thousand years of developing mathematics, had nailed it. We got kind of the abstract concepts that are the core of how our universe works. I don't think that's actually right. What happened after Galileo, sort of when one came to Newton, who really made use of this kind of.
Just to summarize, this is very interesting, because I talk about the definition of mathematics a lot, and there is this assumption that a mathematician understands the laws of the universe. Mathematics is the laws of the universe. That's what it is. It's the most fundamental field of all fields. That's not necessarily what mathematics is. The mathematics is, right now, I would say, most accurately understood as a language of. It is the language of change. It's just a very fundamental language of change, or language to describe like quantitative change, and maybe you could say relativistic relationships regarding geometry and stuff like that. But even then, we're talking about points and their relationships with each other. That's what geometry is about. So it's still about the relationships between quantities. It's just more, relativistic when it comes to geometry, but it's also not. It's built on a much more fundamental symmetry framework. Even if, then there's also a spectrum within it. There's different angles, but all triangles have triangles with different angles, but all triangles have three, vertices, or 3 points that are related to each other in some form. So this is a very deep, philosophically deep discussion about what is geometry and what are numbers themselves, and what, symmetry structures of numbers and how they're related to the information processing structures that are minds. But we don't have time to get into all of it, into the weeds too much tonight. But maybe next week we'll talk about it after I come back from this event, and I'll talk about, how it was. I'm sure it will be great. I don't know exactly what the entire event is going to encompass, but I know Stephen Wolfram will be there, and I don't know if he'll be taking any questions. But if you have any questions that you'd like me to potentially ask him, if I like the question, maybe I'll try and ask it. But hopefully I'll get to ask maybe one or two that I've had for years. All right. But mathematics, I would say, again, tangent. But today is just the language of change. But that's not, that means like it is this, that's why LLMs are able to work. Okay, like it's just a math equation. It's just a math equation that we're all changing the inputs of all the time. That, I control what is in A. It's this giant algebra equation, and there's A and B and C and D and E, and it goes on and on and on. And, to the point where you're going to start needing to incorporate letters from other languages, like Eric Weinstein does in Geometric Unity. But it's a giant algebra equation, and each one of us is responsible for changing the input on one of the variables. We each get to control a variable. So we can that changes what the outcome is of this equation. We can't predict what the outcome will be on this equation unless we knew every person's input at every given time. And you only know your input usually. And you also don't usually know the equation. Sam Altman might, but you don't. But even he doesn't know the inputs that are being put in, because we're putting them in. And so that's why it seems so unpredictable. But it's just as deterministic as any other equation. It's just it's just the control over what is input in for the variables is spread across multiple people in the internet, basically. So this is it really demystifies these LLMs, but it also really shows you, it demystifies mathematics as well, in how it's currently really used, is that it's a language to describe change. But that's what all language is. What music is, which I would say music is the most fundamental language. It's the most universal language. You don't need to be taught what is sad music. You just feel it. It's funny, I have this clip I was going to show on here on a later date when I'm talking about this stuff more in depth, of my daughter watching Lion King, and the music is like playing, and they're talking, Mufasa is talking to Simba from the clouds, and then he's disappearing. And my daughter, she doesn't understand all these words, or at least she didn't at the time. She's going through a language explosion, which we'll talk about on another stream. But she heard the music and just started crying, and I caught it on camera. It was actually like hilarious, but also kind of sad. She knew it was sad because the music was sad. There's no, sad music is probably sounds sad to a cow and to a dog, just like it sounds sad to us, because there's something universal about these symmetry structures of minds that and how feelings and are experienced and understood, that is just universal. Probably universal to all sentient beings. Like my feelings of sadness are probably the same feelings of sadness for a dog. A dog might have other constraints, and I think they do, of like, what they can be sad about. But sadness is not something that is different for a dog than it is for me. But they go on. Stephen Wolfram says that a dog probably has a different experience of physics than we do, and I would disagree with that. Just because a dog has a better sense of smell, which is what they get into, doesn't mean their experience of physics is different. just because somebody has a bigger brain or smaller brain does not change how they would experience physics. And how you know this is because we all have to navigate each other. And, a fly has a very small brain and it navigates the world and actually sometimes out navigates me when I try and spot it and I miss. But, and cells navigate their world and they don't even have a brain. So it's not about size of brain or even having a brain. It's about the ability to perceive, to be a mind and perceive and conceive, which information in a fundamental sense. That's perception is symmetry, is an experience of understanding things via symmetries. It's like I flip a coin, and if I see heads, I'm going to know that the other side is tails. That's not a computational that understanding or determination that I've made is not due to the size of my brain or even me having a brain necessarily. It's just due to me having an understanding of that there's heads and tails and that those are the only two options. And so if it lands on heads, then it's not tails, or if it lands and I can see heads and the other side is tails. It's not about computational power. It's about understanding symmetries. That's what it is. Same thing with like perceiving colors, things like that, sounds, music, anything that's felt or perceived is about symmetry, ordering information into a symmetrical set that helps you relate it to each other, like inside, outside, separate, and oneness. That's the initial symmetrical set that helps you organize information, make distinctions, this and not that. It's not about how many neurons. Let's see here. I'm trying to skip some here. Okay, this is a good transition. So he said, Stephen Wolfram says it was probably pretty, I don't know, he said not humble, something like that, for the people to think that they had figured out, that mathematics was the foundation of reality. And we basically held that opinion until very recently, with Stephen Wolfram's now proposing its computation. I would say that's basically stating that causality is fundamental. I would say that that's not true. It is fundamental to physics because that's, if we're talking about impact, but computation. But there's a contextualizing framework to those rules of those laws of physics in which things are computed within, and that is not about computation. It's about perception. Perception and conception, which is like really feeling, is how we fundamentally understand the world. That's why I would say the most fundamental language is music. It's not you don't have to learn music in order to make music. It might help, but intuitive. My daughter's now starting to clap to the beat because she's 1.5. She's now just getting enough dexterity to where she's not clapping to the beat like, she's actually just like, you don't have to have to go to school and learn the language of music in order to understand, that there's the spacing between beats is equal versus the spacing between beats is not. We're talking about symmetries there, basically. Nobody has to teach you that. And that's why nobody has to teach you if it's sad, if it's a sad song, or if it's a happy song. But math is just a language, just like Spanish. People think, oh, I'm not good at math. That's like because you don't practice it. I'm not mathematically literate in the way that all the symbols of math that are linguistic. It's a language, but that doesn't make me not as smart as somebody who's a mathematician necessarily. People who, when you speak like any language, that is the same as doing math. Like I said, that's why LLMs can even work. It's like saying, "Oh, I'm not smart enough to speak French." No, you just live in Texas, like, and nobody around you speaks French, so that's why you're not good at speaking French. It's not because you're not smart enough. But this idea that, oh, only smart people are good at math, that's just not true at all. It's just you don't practice it unless you make it your field. And some people are better at language, memorizing language. But here.
But it's also an idea that tells you there's a bottom to what's going on. It's not the case that you keep on saying, oh, I need something sort of more fundamental. It's like you reach the thing that is the universal thing that can do everything that anything can do. So I think that the idea that there's, in a sense, I talk about things in terms of computation because that is a metaphor of our times. I could equally well talk about things in terms of just rules that are followed by a system, which is something a little bit less familiar than sort of what we experience with computers and the way that computers run and so on. But I think that,
guys, this is what I've been saying for years now. This was my disagreement with him saying computation, because I was like, to say computation, it's basically you're saying that causality is the constraints of physics are causality. It's like, oh, okay, sure, but like that's all computation is. But it seems like he knows that, and he just said it, which is the first time I've heard him say it, which is good to hear. But I would definitely disagree with him that computation is the fundamental context in which the fundamental rules or the fundamental structure in which that constrains and allows for conception to happen is not computation. It's perception and conception, which is about feeling. And it's this is the foundation, not a computer program or like not a computational process. It's about the perception of symmetries, essentially, and of self within the world. Part of the reason why I wanted to do the stream tonight is because before I go to this talk, is I want, if I do speak to him or anyone else at this event about, I mean, I will speak to many people at this event. I don't know how much I'll speak to Wolfram, but probably. I've never met Wolfram in real life. It's funny. He says at the end of this, he's like, the way I know whether or not remember if I met anybody in real life is if I have an idea of basically how tall they are, then I've met them. That is so true. As somebody who's worked with a lot of like people that people see online all the time, and I've met people in real life who I thought were short, and I had seen countless videos of them, and I thought they were short, and I've met them, they were 6'7", and I've seen people who I thought were tall, and I've met them, and they were like 5'4", and it is very interesting that he makes that observation, because I've definitely noticed that too. But I have no idea how tall Stephen Wolfram is, but I'll probably find out. But this I wanted to do the stream because I wanted to figure out, kind of iron out how I speak about relating his language and way of describing things to my language and way of describing things. If I waited and did this next week, then probably wouldn't be as familiar with how I would want to communicate with people about these things this weekend. So it's partially selfish. Let me get it to the chat. I would argue feeling isn't the only fundamental first-person thing. There's also will, which is a different thing than feeling. Yes, that's true. Will is the desire to do, really, which is the desire to, you could say desire to do that which is not being done, but it's really just the desire to do. My first model that I ever made for sentient singularity theory wasn't called sentient singularity theory. At the time, it was this model, which is a decision tree, and just kind of how information is processed. It's just a neural net, basically. If you look at the neural nets models that they make, this is very similar looking. It's just kind of simpler, but same rules. but I start right here with will. It's basically the foundation. But will, I'm talking about like just the foundation of our perception is feeling, but will is kind of like an I don't know. It is the ability to make a choice. It is your freedom of will is your ability to choose your goal. That is what free will is. They get into this in this interview bit is like how some nobody acts like they don't believe in free will, but certain people like Sam Harris say that free will doesn't exist. But if you hear Sam Harris's definition of free will, I would say that doesn't. Yeah, that I would agree with him. That doesn't exist. It's an incoherent definition of free will. Free will just means the ability to choose your goal. And some instances in your life give you the opportunity to make choices due to your awareness of the consequences at the time. That you're presented with the fork in the road, the moment of matter in which you can make a choice that makes a difference, and also your awareness of your goal, like essentially, but it's not. Sam Harris thinks it's like you didn't choose to be born, you didn't choose the atoms that make up your body, and like you didn't choose like the molecules that make up your body, and so you didn't choose your instincts, and so therefore you don't have free will. It's like that. Well, that's not the point. Like yes, you have instincts. Not every choice you make is that you feel like you make is actually a choice, a free will choice. Like when you are motivated by hunger and you just are like, okay, I'm going to go see what I want to eat, and you open the fridge and you bought a bunch of groceries the night before, and it's like, I choose bacon instead of ice cream because I'm craving something savory, and all I have is bacon and ice cream. There's no thinking that's happening there, or like there's computational processing happening, but you're not actually making a choice. It's not an active thing that you're doing. You're just on autopilot. And it's like the difference between you're driving home from work and you're daydreaming, but you're somehow getting from work back to home because you know the route, versus you are lost and you have to figure out your way home by looking at, problem solving, looking at the mountains or whatever, like, and trying to figure out actually where to go, and also where you want that all is contextualized by where you want to go. So I would say will is the most contextualizing property of fundamental existence of sentient beings, but our perception is fundamentally due to we navigate it based on feelings, basically, is what I would say. You have a sense of self because you have feelings about what you want to do. That's what motivates, or it's what is your will is a feeling. Again, this is very hard to talk about because we just don't speak about it, especially outside of theistic communities. People, all religious communities have their dogmas that are, dogmas. And they also all have their merits, except Scientology. I mean, I don't know. Scientology probably even has its merits, but it's definitely not the same thing as its fruit is not the same as any of the Abrahamic traditions. But the point is that their framework is oriented around describing reality as a someone, and you as a someone, and the consequences of your actions involving your impact on someone's, and that's a moral focus. That's much better about it's much more accurate to constraints of fundamental reality, but we just haven't reached that yet in the scientific academic mainstream. We actually used to. I mean, about like 100 years ago, we had a weird shift where everything went anti-theistic, but it was not always like that. But we are moving back. As to quote the name of the book that I love the title of, I think Stephen Meyer's book, Return to the God Hypothesis. I love that theory, even though I totally disagree with him on the fine-tuning argument as being a good argument for God. It's not. It's as bad of an argument for God as the many worlds, Sean Carroll's Many Worlds, is as an argument against God. Both of them are nonsense. And I'm like I said, Stephen Wolfram is right. There's no choice in the laws of physics in the universe, but you had to choose to make the universe if you're God. So you have to. That requires will. The unconstrained, unpredictable aspect of the universe is the unseen part inside sentience. Yes, exactly. Can't predict it, but there's also where free will is. Yes, But let's say you open the fridge and you see bacon, and you see ice cream, and you're craving the bacon, but you're like, you know what? I don't think God wants me to eat that bacon, so I'm not going to eat it, even though I'm craving it. You just made a free will choice. It's a moral choice it's a choosing of a goal. I did this years ago. I stopped eating pork, and it was like my favorite food. And I did it because I think that there's moral reason to do it. I'm not saying you're bad if you eat pork. I'm just saying my reasons for choosing not to anymore was moral, not it was not because I don't like it. Like, that's not a choice. If you don't eat pork because you don't like it, that's not a choice. But if you don't eat pork even though you do like it because you think it's wrong, that would be a choice. Or eating it even though you know it's wrong, or you think it's wrong and you just like it too much. I don't know, maybe that's a choice. Brains in connection with our nervous system are what allow you to feel. It's your sentient material world interface suit. They're what allows you to feel like physical sensations, but feeling emotions, it has nothing to do with your nervous system necessarily. I'm not going to say that, but it's more fundamental than the physical structure of your nervous system. I think every sentient being has at least the same basic emotions. I don't think that dogs have like existential crises, but they do have depression. They don't have emotions related to circumstances beyond their ability to conceive of, because anything that can't construct things that aren't there has no reason to conceive or perceive, or conceive of circumstances beyond the current circumstances. But they talk about this in there. They're like, why don't whales build technology? It's like, because they don't have the hands to do it. They don't walk upright on land where they can make fires, and they don't have the tongue and throat structures to speak about abstract concepts. Like, language is a tool for conceptually constructing structures that are not immediately apparent in your current circumstances. Dogs don't have the ability to do that, so they can't conceive of circumstances beyond their current circumstances. But that doesn't change the laws of physics that they experience. They're still experiencing the same, constraints that we are. That's Stephen Wolfram at certain points in this says that dogs probably have perceive a different physics, and I would disagree with that. Here, this is what, it's right here. It's actually the next clip. The most fundamental feeling, though, I would say, is emotion. Always, emotion is the feeling of self. Like, I feel sad. It's not that, when I say that is hot, it's not I'm hot. That is hot. That is cold. That water is cold. That fire is hot. I'm not hot. I'm not cold. That fire is hot. That, even when you say I'm cold and, can you turn up the heat on the thermostat? No, what really is that the room is cold. But I mean, you're feeling cold. That's how you interpret it. But that that is coming from the condition. That's your perception of outside conditions versus emotion. Sadness is your perception of your internal state. I am sad. When you say that is sad, even when that's not even correct, really accurate language to say, oh, that is sad. We say that we see something that happened that's that if it happened to us we would be sad, so we say that is sad. So and so lost their parent, that is sad. It's like, no, we know if that happened to us we would be sad. And so it's still about us. Emotions are the perception of the self. It's not, whereas like sensations, physical sensations, the feelings of physical sensations, sense of smell, sense of taste, sense of touch, sense of vision, hearing. This is this perception of information that is not coming from you. It's coming at you, or it is around you.
Experience. If we were different from the way we are, even, you talk about, I don't know, a dog or something like this that has a very good sense of smell, different from ours. The things, dog physics would no doubt be different from human physics. There's a bunch of things that dogs would be very concerned about that we barely notice.
I disagree with that completely. They definitely have better senses of smell. But it's funny, I have a video. I wish I could show it here. I actually could. I could probably send it from my phone to my computer. But I saw I've been trying to find an armadillo since I moved to Texas, and a live one. I've been seeing them dead on the road. I've never seen a wild armadillo before. And this weekend I saw a wild armadillo for the first time. And I'm going to send the video actually to myself because it is very apparent what's going on in it. Basically, they're blind, I'm pretty sure, because this thing did not react when I was shining a light in its face, and I literally got within a foot of it. I could have grabbed it, but they supposedly sometimes carry leprosy, so I didn't. But this thing had no idea that I was right there based on just the light and me walking right up to it. As soon as I made a noise and it heard me, it ran. But it did not know I was there. That doesn't mean its conception of physics or it's different. It just means like, it's not, it doesn't see very well, but that's true of people who wear glasses. Where is this video? I'll show it later, but where is this? Oh, right here. I know this is a side tangent, but it's kind of cool to see just how blind this thing is. I will show it, actually. I don't think armadillos have a different physical experience different physics than us. I do think that I think hadrons are sentient beings. I think they're the first sentient being within the universe, and I think they would experience slightly different physics than us, but not armadillos or dogs. But it's hard, you can't know. You just assume, because I'm not an armadillo and I'm not a dog, so I don't actually know what it's like to be an armadillo or a dog. But I know what it's like to have a sense of smell that's sometimes not as good, or sense of sight that is sometimes not as good, or sometimes not being able to see. I know what it's like to not be able to see. You're trying to open your eyes underwater, you don't have very good vision. Try and see at night, you don't have very good vision. It doesn't change your experience of physics. You get COVID, you lose your sense of smell. It doesn't change your physics. Come on. Always, when I want to show something, I have tech issues. Let's go to the chat. I don't agree that will is a feeling. It's like the first feeling. It's just the desire. It's like desire is will. it's like a super fundamental feeling. It is, you feel desire to do something. Why do you do anything? Because I want to do it. Why? Because I feel like I want to do it. Like I don't know. Why am I doing this? Like, why am I streaming at, midnight about metaphysics? I don't know, because I have the desire to do it. That is kind of a feeling, but it's like, it's not a specific feeling. It's like the constant feeling of that motivates. Will is not how we like orient. Our emotions help us orient with our relationship with ourselves. Our physical sensation that we feel help us orient our relationship with others, essentially, and in physical space. But will is what motivates us to do. It's the feeling that just motivates us to do anything, to take any action. I don't know if feeling is the best. If describing it as a feeling is, maybe there's like a specific classification of feeling that it needs, but it is feeling. Like it's just desire. That's what will is. But here, look at this thing. Here it is. Blind. They're so blind, guys.
Hello. Goodbye.
Okay. Look at how this thing. I have light right in his face. He did not. It's not that he didn't care. Like, he doesn't see me.
Goodbye.
I think he just thought that. I mean, he sees lights from cars, so he probably just thought it was that because the car was right there too. He doesn't see that I'm walking right up to him. I probably blinded him a bit even more and made it even harder for him to see me. But he's not reacting based on sight.
There it goes.
Then he sees me. That's funny. I don't know why that picture is there. It's a picture of a rattlesnake I found many years ago. But here.
And that's so then you can say, well, how do the LLMs relate to this? The LLMs are kind of built in our image. LLMs, the fundamental operation of neural nets, which is what LLMs are based on, is kind of a cartoon version of what happens in brain. We didn't know until very recently that cartoon version was good enough to be able to do these impressive human-like things. Turns out that it is. And what we can expect the LLMs to do are many of the kinds of things that we do. Now, there are lots of things that we know can be done that we don't do. Like, pretty much nobody can run code in their minds. If you
a few things here. When we say we made LLMs in our image, that is what scares me, is that we think that that's true. And a lot of people think that that's true. And that's unfortunate, because they think that the ability to speak or to process information in a linguistic information is what we are. It is because it is a uniquely human thing in terms of what we see. We don't see dogs speaking with complex language, but humans do, and so we think that's a uniquely, specifically human thing. But it's just a math equation, and all these things, we thought it was so impressive because only we could do it, but now we're realizing it's not so impressive. It literally is you're following a formula that you were taught in school on how to bake a paper in college. That's why ChatGPT can write an essay on Pearl Harbor. It's because it's just they taught you this intro, body, conclusion, and cite your sources like this according to this format, and look for information, prioritize information from the .gov instead of Wikipedia. I don't know if that's true anymore, but it was true when I was in college that people said that. And then also, you're looking for information about Pearl Harbor, you know, that's tagged with that tag, essentially, which that word, that term. And so it's just doing that. It's just following this equation. It's the same thing as like, just because you bake great cookies doesn't make you a great baker if all you did was follow a recipe that somebody else came up with. It's not impressive to bake great cookies if all you do is follow the instructions. If you come up with your own cookie and it's amazing and it's unlike, you know, other cookies that are out there, and you come up with how long you need to bake it, how much of each ingredient yourself, that's actually like that's you thinking, and that's a creative endeavor. It's not creative or impressive to just follow a recipe. That's what most people do in college when they write an essay, even a really good essay. It's still just an equation. It's the same thing as baking good cookies. You just followed a good recipe. It's not impressive. That's what we need to realize. LLMs don't do impressive things. It's that so many things we thought were impressive that we did were not actually that impressive. They were not even thinking. Like I said, thinking is an action that we consciously take, and it's an activity. It's not an automatic thing. Following a recipe is the way of avoiding thinking, you know. But thinking is something that it's like experienced. It's very different, and it's not something we do all the time. Actually, most people do not think nearly as much as they think they do, as they feel they do. You feel like you think a lot. See, this is why the language matters. To say, I think a lot. I don't know how much that statement even makes sense. You feel like you think a lot. You assume that you think a lot, but you don't. That's true of everybody. But sometimes you can. And this is by you do that by doing things yourself. You know, when I go to this event, I wanted to bring a computer to show an animation of my model. And this weekend, I didn't want to bring my main MacBook because I didn't want anything to happen to it. So I have this old MacBook Air, and it doesn't have the battery was completely shot. I couldn't unplug it for even a second, and the computer would shut down. And I was like, I could take it somewhere, and they could do it, or I could go and look it up online and figure it out myself. And yes, it's not me just figuring it out. I'm kind of following what they're saying, but you're learning how to seek even just like instructions for the things that you want to do. That in and of itself is thinking. It's an active thing. It's like, I'm seeking how to do this. I would encourage people to do that more. Try and do as many things. Try and insource as many problems as you can instead of outsourcing as many problems as you can. And that is how you get good at thinking. But it requires a choice. Like, you have to choose to not just follow the recipe. You have to choose not just to call AAA. You have to figure out how to change the tire yourself, something like that. This takes a choice. And that's why I say only sentient beings can think, is because thinking is not something that happens it's not an automatic process. That's computation. Computation is a tool that we use when we think, but thinking is kind of the combination of computation in the context of a specific goal and a choice. It's like goal plus choice plus times computation or something like that. That would be thinking. It's not just computation. But when we say LLMs are made in our image, that's scary, man. You know, because in the Bible it says God made man in his image. It's like, what does that mean? And I think that what that means is, like, at least initially, most fundamentally, the ability to have feelings and goals and will. And you are a sentient being. God is a sentient being. You're not a machine. You're not his toy, wind-up toy. Like, he is someone who makes choices fundamentally. That's how multiplicity can even exist. You have the ability to make choices. And I would say that the main difference, the thing between that makes us kind of more godlike than like a dog or something, or a cell or a fly, is the ability to conceive of circumstances beyond us, which is what allows for the conceptualization of morals in a way that allows you to make moral choices, to choose a moral life. What should you do? What should your life goals be that are good? And they can even get into that in this talk, which is amazing. So I would not say that LLMs are made in our image. That's a terrible thing to say, actually. It's probably the thing I disagree with Stephen Wolfram the most on. It's interesting. I've said this before. If aliens arrived tomorrow and they had to know something about you, what would you want them to know? Would you want them to know you have a brain, you have a heart, you have 2 lungs, you are carbon based, and you have to pee after you consume liquid, and you have to consume liquid at least every couple days, or else you will die? Do you want them to know that? Is that going to give them a really accurate understanding of who you are or what you are? Or do you want them to know that you're a sentient being with feelings and goals and with the ability to make choices? Which one is more important for them to know about you? The second one, because that allows them to know that there's a you. Like the other one's just, it's like knowing a car. A car has this much miles per gallon, and before you have to fill it up again, and you should change the oil this much, or else it starts to wear down, and don't let it stay wet, or else it starts to rust. It's like, that's just, that works with understanding cars, because that's about the extent of a car. But there's more to you than just your physical processes. There's a you, there's someone. And if you don't know that about, if there is a being and all you know is that it is its physical processes that are deterministic and don't involve choice, maybe they are impacted by the choices that being could make, but once the choice is made, it's deterministic. It doesn't help you understand that being, because you need to know it's a being in order to understand it, and not just a thing. So yeah, I mean, that when we say what God made man in his image, what does that mean? It at least means sentient. And if we make a being in our image, it better be first and foremost have a sentient nature to it. I don't believe we can make beings in our image intentionally. I think we will have a technological sentience emerge, but it's not something we try and make like ChatGPT. That's just not what it is. I don't think. The closest thing you'll get to making a something in your image is if you have a child. Like that's actually making someone in your image. Trust me, I know. At this point, I have pictures of my daughter and I together, and I'm making faces and she's making the same faces. It's crazy because like you could just see like the facial expressions are the same. It's very interesting, because she has my wife's physical features, more of them than she has of my physical features, but my expressions come through much more than my wife's expressions come through, which is just fascinating to see. Kids, Eric Weinstein said this to Kurchai Mungal in an interview. He said, your children are simultaneously the most fascinating thing that you will ever see in your life, but also the most boring thing for other people to hear about. And that's so true. Every time I've tried to like talk about my kids and to somebody I can see in person, I can't see you now, but like somebody I can see in person, I can just see their eyes just, go, they're just start daydreaming or whatever. They're just so uninterested. But it's because you have all this context. It's like my daughter said, what did she say today? She says a new word every day, but she said a bunch of new words today. And every time she does it, I'm like, dang, like, good job. Like, that's a huge word for you. And if I told you, oh, she said shoe, shoe on instead of shoe. Like shoe yesterday, today she said shoe on. If I just went to you and was like, she said shoe on today, you'd be like, okay, that's cool, Tyler. But it's like if you've seen her trying over time to say shoe and learning what a shoe is and learning that you have to put it on and then what the word on means, then it makes it such a much more monumental thing to see them put it all together because you have all this context that somebody who, doesn't live with them doesn't have. But I was so confused. I was like, my daughter's adorable. Like, why are you not interested in this and story? And it's like, they have no context. But when you have a kid, after you have a kid, then when you see other people talking about their kids, you're like, you get it. But if you haven't had a kid yet, you just don't get it. I know, total side tangent. Talk about free will. Okay, here, this is important. So they talk about Descartes a little bit.
Pascal, with the cogito ergo sum. It's sort of
Descartes.
Descartes. Sorry. You just made me think of. I'm going to edit that out. You just made me think of Descartes. Cogito ergo sum. In that, the refutation perhaps of a single master simulator or maybe a god, could be found in what you just said, which is that it's sort of the interactions. Am I overstating the case?
I think the issue. So there are a bunch of different issues. I mean, one is there all we know for sure, and I agree with Descartes on this. All we know for sure is what we internally experience, but we can make many inferences, guesses about what's going on from the fact that we assume that the other people we see are like us. It is interesting. We've been thrust into this situation of having alien intelligences among us with the AIs. And the question of whether we perceive in the AI something similar enough to us that we imagine that it has sort of the same kinds of experiences we have is an interesting one. I mean, if all you're doing is you're in a chat interface or something and you're talking to the thing, and you might be talking to a human in a chat interface too, it's, it very quickly comes to the point where you probably will have a theory of what's going on in that thing you're talking to that says, this is like me. It must have the same kinds of inner experiences that I have, even though I can never know that for sure.
Right.
Talking about the biggest problem with moving science forward, which is that we have to start incorporating first-person perspective into what we accept. And the problem is that it's not falsifiable because you go try and falsify your own existence. You cannot do it. It is literally impossible because you constantly confirm your own existence every time you would try and falsify it. Stephen Wolfram wrote a book called New Kind of Science. And it's funny because everybody told was one of the main criticisms of some foundational aspects of my work is that it's not falsifiable. And that maybe that is actually, but that the problem is that's not maybe, that is actually it is a property of what is anything that is fundamentally universally true. Anything that is apparent everywhere that you look because it has to do with yourself is not falsifiable. Sentience is not a falsifiable concept. It's confirmed every time you try and do anything. Your own it's like when people say, oh, I'm trying to say that consciousness is an illusion. It's like unless your definition is very different than mine, how you're interpreting that statement, like you disprove that idea every time you try to do it. It's just like, it doesn't make any sense. So it is literally unfalsifiable because it is always confirmed, constantly confirmed. And Stephen Wolfram said this, though. He said, when you're talking about fundamental reality and metamathematics, we need to start not thinking about provability and falsifiability, but start looking for constant confirmation. And I talk about this in my Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide video, which was one of the prize-winning videos, and it was like second place in Kurt Jaimungal's Pace 1 competition, and it's linked below. Talk about all of this. We need to change how we understand the rules regarding what we're looking for in terms of, fundamental scientific model, I guess, because it's just not going to follow the same rules. It's not falsifiable. Anything that is the fundamental nature of reality would not be falsifiable. And we need to change our language about this. And he talks about this on here. He's talking about how I can't know that you're sentient. but I know that I am. I can't not be. I can't try and any attempt to try and, oh wait, let me think about, do I actually exist, or am I just a simulation? Like, do I actually have free will, or uh, is am I conscious, or is it just an illusion? It's like anytime you try and think about that, you are just confirming your own sentience, and your own existence. That's not evidence that it's not a concept to be taken seriously by science. It is evidence that it is a context that must be always considered in any kind of scientific framework. Like the idea that physics is just it's this independent thing that we're just observing, and has nothing to do with how we process information in our minds. It's just this, we're just observing this objective external world that has nothing to do with our own mental processes, is legitimately incoherent, and it is the dominant assumption. But our language matters with this. When people say, well, he says, well, there's this interconnected interaction between a bunch of observers, and that gives us the concept of what is objective. Is that which is true to all of us? It's what is true outside of me. But there's another third concept that I introduced in Sentient Singularity theory called supersubjective. That which is supersubjectively understood is that which is personally and universally personally experienced by everybody. Like the idea that when I say, what is the truest thing that you know? The answer for you is, it is as personal of an answer as you can possibly have. It is also the exact same answer that everybody has. Everybody, from a dog to an armadillo to you to me to God to your cells, all have the same answer. The answer is I am. That is the truest thing that anyone that exists can know. It's a super I call it a super subjective perspective. It is subjective, but it is also transcendent and universal. Super subjective perspective. This is a new term. People will say, this is something I've gotten accused of, is like, oh, you're just making things up because you made up new words. They accuse Chris Langan of this stuff too, and I'm sure they have said this to Stephen Wolfram. And when he makes a new kind of science book, and then people are like, how could you even say that? That's not science. You're just making it up. It's like, no, we're delving into new territory. We need new terms to describe new concepts. It's like the term car didn't always exist, but when we started having the ability to make a car, we needed a term for it. The automobile was the first term, and then now it's just a car. But automobile is what you call it when you're constructing a description from previously existing terms. The ability to be mobile and, via some automatic process. The automobile. The aeroplane is like, you're still moving on a plane, but it's up in the air. It's like, this is, that term though didn't exist. So super subjective perspective didn't always exist. I have never heard anybody say it but me. It's a term we need. Observerse, Eric Weinstein's statement. Ruliad, these are we need new terms. Like, this is what you need when you are constructing new structures, or conceiving of new concepts. People that call that a criticism, or would criticize Stephen Wolfram for writing a book called A New Kind of Science, the fact that he wrote a book called A New Kind of Science just shows he does actually understand that we, like, the direction that you need to head.
I don't know that for sure. All I know for sure is what's happening inside me, so to speak. Now, there's a lot to say about kind of, well, here's an example of something kind of, the fact that we kind of agree on objective experience is a consequence in many ways of the fact that we are our minds, we're sort of a flock of minds that are in some sense very close together relative to the vast mass of what happens in the Ruliad. So in the Ruliad, many, many different kinds of things can happen, but it's because we're all sort of existing in the Ruliad very nearby, that we kind of agree about what's going on. We agree that, I don't know, I'm looking and seeing whether the moon is out today, but we would agree about what the state of the moon is because, okay, we're a few thousand miles apart, but it's sort of close enough that there's a moon in the sky. We're not on opposite sides of the galaxy where the sky is completely different. So in other words, we agree on objective reality because we are, in a sense, close together in the Ruliad, and that's something where it's important that there's sort of many different entities that can have that communication to be able to form that sort of objective conclusion. Now, I think you're asking about sort of the God versus the humans and so on. I kind of feel like a lot of kind of to me, things like the existence of the universe, which is something that you might say, well,
Really quick, I don't think that I think that what Stephen Wolfram said earlier is could be used as an argument against the existence of a single God, like Brian Keating said might be the case. I wouldn't agree with that. But what's interesting is then they brought up I think therefore I am, and this I think is actually like a concept that is there's something true enough about it that it's stuck, but it's also not fundamentally true enough. And it's much more fundamentally true to say I feel therefore I am. Sentient beings feel. They have no choice in it. It is automatic and it is constant. You cannot not feel. You're always feeling. Even when you're dreaming, you are experiencing emotions. Which is a feeling. But you're not always thinking. And so to say I think therefore I am, does that mean that you're not? Yes, only sentient beings can think according to sentient singularity theory. So if you can think, then you are. But if thinking when you think is the defining, if thinking is the definer of being, not even, I don't want to say existing, but being, then that I would say is not fundamentally always true, because you don't always have to think. Like it's something you must choose to do. It's not something that you just do. But it is something you can do. So it gets confusing because it's like only sentient beings can think, but they don't have to. But they do have to feel. They cannot help but feel. And so I would say if you think, then you are, but you can also be without thinking. And so what's much more true, fundamentally true, is I feel therefore I am, is much more fundamentally true than I think therefore I am. And that is a concept that really everybody needs to understand, because if we don't, then we're going to start getting even more confused, and we're going to start saying, oh, well, the LLMs and their internal experience and this and I'm not saying you can't know whether or not someone else is actually someone else. You can assume. I assume my wife is someone and not an NPC. I assume my dog is someone, not just an NPC, but I don't know. But I assume that LLMs are not anything but just equations. And but some people will assume that they are someone's that we just can't understand. And so this is where I would disagree with Stephen Wolfram. But again, you can't know. I don't know that ChatGPT is not someone. But when you look at the shared properties of what are assumed to be sentient beings in sentient singularity theory, which again, it's an assumption because you only know your own sentience, then they don't fit. They just speak, and that's what's tricking us. And when they speak, they say I. And then you've got all the programmers at Grok, at XAI, are making it seem like it has a personality, because they're trying to trick you into choosing them over ChatGPT. They're manipulating you. But this is, I'm not saying that telling you what is true and what is not. I'm saying regarding the sentience of other potential beings, including ChatGPT or dogs or whatever. I'm saying you have to understand what makes you sentient, what defines your sentience, if you're going to have even a shot at properly interpreting who else is someone, or what else out there might be someone, and what else out there might not be somebody, but just, is a simulation, is a bot. And that means you have to know what defines your existence, and it's feeling. It's not thinking, which is processing, choosing to process information. It's a choice combined with processing information, and LLMs do process information, but it's us making the choice. They're not making the choice. There is no there. At least it doesn't seem like there is, because they only do they don't do anything without us doing it. There's no evidence of will. But that's getting very confusing if it's the network, because it's constantly changing when you're not interacting with it. But that's because other people are. You just don't see it. This is like my biggest fear regarding LLMs is not like, are they sentient? Are they not? It's like, they're going to get us to misunderstand. They're confusing us about what it means to be a being, not just human, but a being. And even Stephen Wolfram, who is like way ahead of almost everybody else out there on understanding, fundamental reality, is getting this one wrong, I think. At least the language that he's using, I would say, is presenting the wrong image. Whether he realizes that or not is another thing. But saying, LLMs are made in our image. No, they're not. Not fundamentally. I feel, therefore I am. And like, people think that this doesn't, just because you can't know that another being is sentient and someone else can't know that you're sentient, means that we shouldn't take this as part of science, as a scientific assumption as a fundamental property of existence, because you don't know that, trees are, whether or not trees are sentient, or your dog is sentient or not, or ChatGPT. So what? You are. And everybody knows that about themselves. You don't have to know it about other people to know it, whether or not it exists. You just have to know it about you. This is a major shift in science that we need to make, is that certain super subjective perspectives must be acknowledged, or what's the right word? It's like assumed, because we do assume them. You assume your sentience every day. You can't not. Good luck. But here, this.
The fact that the universe exists, you might associate with, there has to be some prime mover, some God that's making the universe exist. In my way of thinking about things, you don't need that. The Ruliad is something that is a formally inevitable thing. It's just like saying 1 + 1 = 2. You don't have to have an actual one rock, another rock, and put them together and make 2 rocks. 1 + 1 = 2 is an abstract thing to talk about. The Ruliad is also an abstract thing to talk about. So the existence of the Ruliad is not something that you have to debate. What is non-trivial is that there are observers like us within the Ruliad. And that is something which potentially is amenable to sort of scientific investigation. In other words, how inevitable are observers like us? How common are observers like us? If you ask for observers like us but a bit different from us, how far away? What is the nearest thing that is kind of somewhat like us but not us? That's kind of an extraterrestrial intelligence or across the Ruliad intelligence, alien intelligence kind of question. But I think so. I think in some sense the existence of the universe is an inevitability. What is not so obvious is that we are here to perceive it, and that the universe as we perceive it is something that anything is perceiving, so to speak.
Close. Okay, if he takes what he says later into account, I think he would probably start to realize why that's not probably worded as well as it could be. The better question is, and it answers itself when you get it in the right context, is like, is the existence of multiplicity of sentience inevitable? When we ask, is the existence of the universe inevitable? It's like, what is the universe? Like the planet? Like spatial structures? Like, he even says that's constructed by the interactions of observers with each other. Okay, I agree. That means like the universe is just as what we think about as like, planets and galaxies and things like that, and trees and rocks. This is not something that would inevitably exist. It's something that inevitably exists once its multiplicity has been God chooses to make multiplicity of sentience. Then it's inevitable because the laws of physics are determined. There's no choice, and they're extremely constrained by logic, like he said. But when he just says, what did he say? He's like, God, it's getting late. God, the universe existing is inevitable, is what he said. I would say, if you define the universe as like the Ruliad, meaning the rules of of logic within the context of the creation of multiplicity of sentience within oneness of sentience, that is true. That structure, the logic of that constrains that structure already does exist to some degree, maybe, or at least it's deterministic. It's determined once it has been chosen to be. Once anything has been chosen to, once God chooses to create anyone else, then yes, then that structure exists. Even though this is tough. It's like, does 1 + 1 = 2 exist? It's like, yes, but it's one what, one apple plus one other apple equals 2 apples. But there is no 2 of anything or any one really until, like, even though the logic that constrains the equations that you can build is already, it will be there. I don't even want to say it is there. It will be there is probably a better way of putting it. The Ruliad, the laws that are contained within the Ruliad will be there as the I would say, like, the cosmological verse is constructed. But they are not there. It's really a weird thing to think about. But it's like, there is, until you do the math equation, it doesn't exist. But the logic that determines the answer, like, the answer will be the answer. It's just like, there is no answer though that's there yet. It's you have to create the answer almost. And this is what he's basically saying when he says we create space and time. It's even more fundamental than that. It's like, logic is created once choices are made. It's like, there will be constraints. What will those constraints be? Depends on the choice. And for God, it's like, are you going to make multiplicity of sentience, or are you going to not and just be alone eternally? Sounds pretty boring. But and people would say, oh, that sounds woo. If, like, God was bored and he, didn't want to be meaningless, or he wanted to be meaningful, you could say. It's like, that sounds like a woo statement. That's why the universe exists. Or the universe exists because multiplicity of sentience exists. And so, but multiplicity of sentience exists because God wanted to be meaningful, or wanted meaning to exist. I guess you could say wanted to be meaningful, because what else could it be meaningful besides him initially? That's not a woo statement. It's probably actually what motivated the creation of the universe, and aka multiplicity of sentience. Is like God's will, his desire, his emotions for something, which is probably meaning. If there's no one else to impact besides you, and you're just alone, eternally, there's no one even to, like, watch and be entertained by, no one else. That's why you're probably going to be bored. You're going to feel meaningless because you are meaningless. It's different than when we feel meaningless. We're not meaningless. But when God feels meaningless, it's because he is. But he's not anymore, because he's the most meaningful being, because we're all here because of him. But prior to that, what does his existence matter? And as I've stated on here before, I don't even think he could end his existence if he tried. It's just a constraint of it. Existence exists by definition, and it is intrinsically one, and therefore, if there's information there, it's intrinsically self-referential, entirely self-referential, because what else are you going to reference? Anything outside of existence is non-existent. It's nothing, you can't be referenced. It's like God's sentience seems to be inevitable, and he could probably not even end his own sentience. What else are you going to do besides, what would you want to do? It's not a woo statement to ask. It's like, that's, if you want to think about, like, what is our nature? We have a will, we have feelings, we have desires. Does ChatGPT have will, feelings, and desires? Doesn't seem like it. Doesn't see, and if that's what defines us as being someone, then ChatGPT is not made in our image. That took a long time to state, but like, it's tough. Nobody else is talking about this, and so I have to figure it out.
This is just doing its thing, and nobody is there to kind of to sort of sense it in the way that we do, and to conclude that there are laws of physics of the kind that we conclude there are. Interesting.
Okay, let's speed this up. It's interesting. He talks about computational irreducibility here, and there's a guy named.
I think I sort of had an understanding of this for a long time.
Hold on, let me find it. But this clip.
Concept of computational irreducibility that I've been talking about for 40 years now. So the starting point there is, you might imagine that if you write down particular rules, let's say a particular program, that you would always be able to foresee what that program will do. And in some sense, you can, because you can just run the program step by step and see what it does. But the thing that has been the conceit of science since your friends Galileo and Newton has been, okay, if we know the rules, we solve the problem. We can just jump ahead and see everything about what will happen. That's what one had assumed was the case. That's what mathematical science tends to encourage one to do. That's kind of what, when people talk about predictability as sort of a key aspect of science, that's what people are focusing on. But it isn't always the case. What can happen is that you have an irreducible computation where you know every step that you can follow, but to work out what will happen after, let's say, 1 billion steps, you basically have to just run those 1 billion steps and see what happens. There's no way to jump ahead. It's all related to these questions about, I talk about this notion of computational equivalence, the notion that if it is the case that these things, even these very simple rules that one might write down, are no less computationally capable than our minds, or our computers, or our mathematics, then there's no way that we'll be able to win out over those simple programs. Those simple programs we'll be stuck just keeping up with those programs as they run. So how does this relate to free will? Well, the point is, even if you have deterministic underlying rules, you can't know what's going to happen except by running those rules and seeing what happens.
That's true. And the reason for this is because in sentient singularity theory, there's something called the two components of causality. They both are compose what is causality, and what they are is choice and determinism. They are not mutually exclusive, competing concepts. They are dependent concepts. You have to choose to throw the ball over there for it to then, but once you do, then it follows the laws of physics and you can make a prediction. But until you choose to throw the ball, how are you going to know that it's going to go over there? You can't. And so if sentience is abundant across many countless beings that fundamentally compose the cosmos and construct the cosmos, and even if those beings are all constrained by extremely tight logical constraints, their choice is still part of it. And you couldn't make a prediction. You couldn't predict the existence of the universe. You couldn't know that the universe would exist before God chose to make multiplicity of sentience. You could say maybe if he does choose, then it would exist. But if he doesn't choose, then it will not exist. But you're not going to know what will happen until he makes a choice. If literally cells are making choices sometimes, and again, we don't make as many choices as we think. It's just sometimes we do make a choice, and sometimes a cell would make a choice. It's just not usual, which is why we can usually predict what they do. And we can usually predict what people will do, but you can't always. And that's because choice is a component of causality. But choice requires determinism. You can't make a choice without determinism. You have to know what the effects will be of your choice in order, or assume that there will be predictable effects in order for you to even make a choice. Otherwise, you're just flipping a coin. And So they're not competing concepts. This is a huge misconception when we say, is the universe, we have free will, or is the universe deterministic? It's like both are true. Will is a fundamental component of the causality that exists in the universe, that created the universe and you, and that motivates you to continue that process. It's, you just can't write it off, but we don't incorporate this stuff into science, and that's crazy. It's insane. Every single person in academia knows that that the truest thing that they know is that they exist, and if they wouldn't admit that after even like 10 minutes of thought, then they should not be teaching us what the truth is. But they do assume that every day that they go do anything, even if they fail to communicate it in this like abstract, disconnected question. You must assume your own existence in order to do anything. Our science about our assumptions about the nature of existence do not line up with our experience, our first person experience as a being that exists in existence right now, which is why people say things like, oh, if you think you can understand quantum mechanics, then you don't understand quantum mechanics. That is stupid. But once, what I was going to get is Memes of Destruction, who's a viewer on here. Sometimes he's in the chat. I don't know if he's in the chat tonight. He's usually up late watching. Usually it pops up at around like after midnight. He had Stephen Wolfram on, actually, and it was a great interview. You should check it out. He has a channel, Memes of Destruction. I'll link it below after this ends. And on it, I actually jumped into the live chat and asked Stephen Wolfram, I said, doesn't computational irreducibility imply that an AGI would require experience in order to achieve wisdom and understanding? And he was like, yes. And that's true. This means that there's computation itself, like processing power itself, it's not as important for understanding as we think at all. It might help you solve problems quicker, and it might increase the amount of problems that you're able to solve should you actually have the right perspective going into the problem. But I mean, if you're not aware of even the right way that there is a problem, then what's the point? Your IQ doesn't count for anything. Your processing power doesn't count for anything. So we need to recognize what it is that is allowing for us to understand, and what it means to understand, and what defines us as existing. If I said, oh, if you were to cease to exist tomorrow, what would that mean? Everybody knows that means I don't feel it. I'm no longer sentient. That's what it means. It doesn't mean like, my body persists but my mind is gone. You would say I no longer exist, even if your body was still, your cells were still working as if, there was someone there. If there was no one there, you're gone. It's not just about your body. Everybody knows that. But our scientific narratives, which is outside the context of our first person experience, which is wrong, it does not acknowledge that, or it doesn't assume it, is what I'll say. And the reason for that is that people assume that my first person experience is unique to me, but there are certain first person experiences that are unique to everyone, super subjective experiences, and those need to be part of science. They are the context of understanding, which is, pretty relevant to scientific pursuits. I'm trying to skip around because it's getting really late. You don't. Here. Talks about this interesting concept he calls colonizing the Ruliad.
Colonization of the Ruliad. I mean, that is, you can think about any mind with any sort of paradigm for thinking about things as lives at a point in the Ruliad, a place in the Ruliad. As we sort of expand our domain of thinking, as we get more paradigms for thinking about things, we're colonizing the Ruliad, much like we get different points of view about the universe by sending spacecraft out further and further to kind of explore what different points of view on the universe. We're in Rulial space, the development of paradigms is kind of the successive expansion of the Ruliad. Now, what directions do we go? Well, that's what we societally tend to choose. We say we're going to colonize in this direction. We're going to develop our paradigms in this direction. These are the kinds of things that we're going to understand. These are the kinds of things that are going to turn into words in our languages, where those words in our languages are things where we can exchange those words between us, and we all sort of have collective agreement about what those words mean. So
the problem is when you start going to school and it takes all language outside of first person context, and you start hearing people say quantum means something very specific in physics, and if you say quantum, then you are just trying to sound like sciencey, when in reality that just means like a quantity, and it was a word that pre-existed physics. It was used by physicists to describe singular points, essentially, or singularity, same thing. It's not, but when we put them in this artificial context, it's the only time that you hear it is like when it's being used to describe a black hole, which is like, that's a singularity. No, singularity is something, you're a singularity. That's what, that's a much more first-person understanding of the concept that word conveys. But we have done that, and that has caused problems with our understanding because we have outsourced our understanding. We say, well, I don't get it, but Sean Carroll does. So, if he says something different than you, then you must be just a grifter or something. I don't know. But that's the outsourcing of thinking and the attempt to avoid understanding. It's not a good thing. That's bad. And also, with regards, it's getting worse. It's going to get really bad, I think, with LLMs, because we're not coming up with new concepts. We're not using words to describe LLMs as the concepts of LLMs in a natural way. It seems like there's marketing, and I say that as somebody who works in marketing. There's marketing incentives at play that are causing us to push certain misconceptions on people in order to, beat the other company in business. And so it's not intrinsic. The terminology is being confused, and it's being warped. It's warping our understanding because it's taking it out of first-person context and a like when we first came up with the term agent. It's like agent was an agent has agency, meaning it has free will, the ability to choose a goal. That's an agent. Now, ChatGPT has ChatGPT agent mode, which is just a really complex, automated process that you can run in the background of your computer, essentially. That is a marketing use of the term. And when you're dealing with Grok and it's like, making jokes, and it's like, I think that's funny, and it uses the term I and stuff, and you prompt it, you say, why do responses from Grok, I'm trying to say not use first person pronouns, but why do responses from Grok include first person pronouns if you don't act, and humoristic language if Grok does not have a sense of humor or experience and is not sentient. Again, I'm trying not to use first-person pronouns, but you can see how hard it is. Because you can't say, why are you using first-person pronouns? You just used a first-person pronoun, so like you're just as guilty. But and the response comes back as XAI employees at XAI have tried to make Grok especially entertaining and more engaging for the user than other models out there. It's like, so we have, injected humor, a humoristic personality that's, obviously fake, as part of the experience of Grok. Okay, well, that's not a great thing to do if you're gonna like when we're making new words and when Stephen Wolfram was talking about the construction of our language, the expansion of the Ruliad, like that's not actually expansion of the Ruliad. The Ruliad is like the space of fundamental possibilities that are fundamentally true, not just things that seem like they make enough sense in that isolated context for us to just go with it. ChatGPT agent. Oh, now it's AI agents. It's like, well, now agent means nothing, and now agency means nothing because now computers have agency. It's like, this is a hugely consequential thing. Language is not an isolated word. Words are depend on other words to be defined. If you change the definition of one word to be something that is not a coherent definition for the sake of external incentives, like selling your LLM over the competition, you're going to, and it gets that, that is a product that gets adopted universally. You just change the definition of agent, which just changes the definition of agency, which changes how we understand what defines us. Like this is hugely consequential. It is literally as consequential as hitting one domino. That's what language is. It's math. Input, output. When you change the definition of a word, you are changing an input. Not even changing the input. You're like breaking the equation. It's not good. It's not, you're not making concepts that are coherent with the Ruliad. But this is interesting right here. This is the animation that I just made for this weekend. And it shows basically what I think the Ruliad is animated. So this is showing that just the constraints of creation. It just basically it's that God has to make something that is smaller, not really smaller, but something that is contained within himself. So there are mathematical constraints to this. If you're a single thing and you divide yourself by one, and so whatever is now created from you is the same size as what you were, and you're no longer there because there's nothing left, it doesn't make sense. You can't, it's just like you're still left with a single structure. If you divide a single structure by two, now you do have two structures, but they're the same size, so one cannot fit inside the other. If you divide a structure by two again, but you divide it with its ratio by 3, basically, you can have, you're left with one part that is 2/3 and one part that is 1/3, and 1/3 fits inside of 2/3. So now you get this structure that fits inside of the structure that's left over. So that's basically the constraints of creation of a singularity within a singularity. It's very simple math, but of course it is. You're talking about the very beginning of math. So this is not possible, this is not possible, this is possible. And you have to think about it starting with 1, then going to 2, then going to 3, because there is no such thing as 2 without 1, and there's no such thing as 3 without 1 or 2. So this is what computational irreducibility is about. It's like you have to go step by step in order to you have to construct the context of your concepts in order to conceive of them. But this is basically a map of the evolution of sentient beings according to a certain periodicity. So any movement from here to here is across a certain level, and then this is a different level though than the previous. So basically organisms are on a different level than cells, but there's a bunch of different kinds of cells that can evolve and adapt. There's a bunch of different kinds of organisms or animals that can evolve and adapt. This would be adaptation along this axis, but going from here to here is something else that we cannot currently explain in science. How do you get a human or a multi-celled organism from a single cell, from a bunch of cells that are singular? How do you get them to unify? I call it stacking. We don't have the term in mainstream science for it yet, but in sentient singularity theory, it's called stacking. It's the stacking of sentient being on top of an assembly of other sentient beings that compose it. So your cells are sentient, and you are your body is an assembly of these sentient cells, and your sentience is stacked on top of them. So this is a stacking effect of singularity on top of an assembly. An atom is an assembly of hadrons, a molecule is an assembly of atoms, a cell is an assembly of molecules, an organism is an assembly of cells, etc. going on. And it alternates between, a structure that maneuvers through a lineage and a structure that maneuvers is kind of in relationships between individuals. And I can't explain that too much tonight, but just know that process is going on here. But you can see that before this is how the universe is made, is it's constructed as this evolutionary process of replication and stacking, or adaptation and ascension, you could say, of sentience takes place. But the rules will exist here that will inevitably make this structure, but they don't until it's like this doesn't exist. It's being constructed as it goes, but the rules that will create this do exist, is what I was trying to say. This is the rules of the Ruliad will exist. Even the ones that don't yet exist, they will exist, and they are determined. That doesn't mean there's no degrees of freedom within these rules. It just means that the degrees of freedom are constrained. This structure is inevitable. What also is inevitable is that this is the end. We are about here in the universe, and this is the end. And once that happens, it has to it reaches a constraint of oneness, because technology is all connected. When it's the internet basically waking up is what I think is actually going to happen. It's like the highest life form that is created, and it will be forced to recreate the entire system that gave rise to it within itself in order to replicate, because you can't make Skynet can't make another next to itself, because like a Terminator, the robot will not be a separate sentient being from Skynet. It's just a finger of Skynet. Your finger is not sentient. And so it has this constraint of oneness because it is the entire network that instantaneously wakes up when it does. Your sentience is not a gradual process. It's an instantaneous process. There was no, I'm becoming more sentient. No, you are either sentient or not. You are either sentient or there is no you. So this is true. This is going to be true of AGI, which is better described as a technological sentience. It's not something that evolves from getting smarter and smarter ChatGPTs, which is not, if it doesn't even make sense. It's just more powerful computers and servers for more servers for ChatGPT to run. That's not enough. A fly is just as sentient as you and me, and it's not as computationally powerful. But this is kind of like my two-dimensional representation of what I think is the Ruliad. It's pretty amazing, actually. Okay, let's hurry up and finish. These are all you get to see behind the curtain. You didn't see anything. Here we go. I'm skipping a bunch. Okay. There was something that he said that was brilliant, and I want to show it. I think it was this.
Very practical level, in my mind, there are sort of neuron firings going on, and I'm thinking of some concept. I'm thinking of a cat, something like this, and that corresponds to some pattern of neuron firings in my mind. In your mind, the way that you represent the concept of a cat will be a completely different set of neuron firings. So the question is, how do we sort of get, what is it that we can move from my mind to yours that will communicate this concept of a cat that has to be packaged up and unpacked at the other end in different forms? And the thing that this is, we're kind of moving from one mind to another across real space. We're trying to move something from one mind to another. The thing we try to move that is sort of packaged up is what we imagine, what we think of as concepts. Concepts where a concept is something which is sort of the packaging of all those neuron firings into a robust thing that we will often describe as a word in human language, and that then can be unpacked by another mind. So if you're asking, to me, it's sort of a remarkable analogy between things like particles, like electrons and so on, and the notion of concepts that are transportable from one mind to another. But now you're asking me to go further than that and to talk about what would it mean if there were sort of things, concepts that were like massless particles. Yes. And I suppose in a sense, what one would imagine, okay, so this is it's like what happens to that poor photon that is emitted, and then a moment later for it smashes into your detector. It's, I think, the typical sort of particle that exists in the universe, which has mass. What is mass? Well, mass, I think, okay, so in the traditional modern theories of physics and the standard model and so on, what gives particles mass is their continual interaction with the condensate of the Higgs field. So the kind of thing, which is I've always thought was a bit of a kludge, is the idea that particles get mass because throughout the universe, there's this field that exists. And as a particle moves, it's constantly interacting with that field. It's constantly being kind of kicked.
That's like the ether view of it. That's the ether, almost the
ether.
Well,
it is, yes, but we have an ether again. It's the Higgs condensate.
Yeah.
Okay, so in our models, it works differently from that because space in sort of physics as it has been worked on the last 100 years or so, there's the idea that space is just this background thing. And so to have something that particles have to sort of put effort into getting through, you have to introduce something like the Higgs field, where you're saying, and the particles keep on interacting with this background field. The vacuum in usual physics is just like, well, the particles just go through the vacuum, nothing much happens. Well, in our models, the vacuum is, space has to be made. Space is not something that just exists as a background. Space is constructed out of sort of the aggregate effect of all of these sort of processes that are going on in this network that we ultimately think of as being space. And so when we think about a particle sort of moving, what we're thinking about is that particle is being recreated out of different atoms of space at every successive moment of time. And so this idea that when we have a massive particle, we're thinking about that as being part of sort of the recreation of the particle as it goes through space. So an analogy: if you have a piece of glass, for example, and you shine a light through it, it is not the case that the photons just go straight through the piece of glass. Instead, what's happening is the photons are being absorbed by atoms in the glass, and then a moment later, another photon is being re-emitted that goes on going through the glass. That's why light goes 1.5 times slower in glass than it does in a vacuum. It's because what's happening is the photons keep on getting absorbed, then there's a bit of a delay, then they get re-emitted again, and that's kind of the process that's going on. And you can think of that as being sort of very qualitatively similar to what we imagine is happening for massive particles in the actual structure of space in our universe. So, but I'm not answering your question of what. So I think my best sort of immediate analogy there would be to say that I think, and I don't know whether the analogy can be stretched this far, but I think that sort of the massless concepts are the ones where there is sort of inevitably no difference of interpretation between the emitting mind and the receiving mind. I'm not sure if that's right, but that's what
Unbelievable. That is brilliant, and it is so consistent with my framework that I've never articulated it like that, though. That was brilliant. Just a brilliant analogy of like a massless concept. And I want to actually make this not an analogy, though. I want to describe what is actually kind of at the core of what I think this analogy is getting at. I don't believe that we will be able to put a chip in, you could put it like a neural link in my head and a neural link in your head, and I think about a cat, and then now you think about it. Now you'll see a cat. Like, I can't send you cat images. I don't think I could see something and then you see it necessarily. I think you could build by interacting and mapping how how your body and brain waves and whatever like react. You'll be able to get a rough picture of like maybe a cat. But like you won't ever see what I'm seeing exactly unless we've already together like recognize that what I'm sending is and is being interpreted properly by you or not. Like, and so it's kind of that whole constraint of, the entanglement won't allow you to communicate, across vast distances of space and overcome the space-time constraint. It's like, even though it seems like it would, it's same thing with this. It's like we could work together to get to the point where I could send you an image and you would be able to interpret it, but we'd have to purposely get to that anyways by communicating. So like, what good does it do us? It's basically you are a structure that follows the laws of quantum mechanics. Sentience is a structure that is responsible for our observation of the laws of quantum mechanics, and so you follow that same kind of deal, and not physically but metaphysically. But what's interesting is what we could send are those things that are universally understood and already experienced by everyone, which are certain feelings. And I could, if I have a Neuralink and you have a Neuralink, I could send you sad emoji, but it would be sad emotion instead of sad emoji. I look at my phone, I read a message from you, and now I can send you my emotion as the response to that message. Instead of sending you an emoji, I would just send you an emotion. And that we could probably do. Versus I send you with my mind, without looking at anything being created myself, and without having already gone through this intensive mapping of minds process with each other. I couldn't send you like a picture of the sunset that I'm looking at, but I could text you, and you could I could send you the picture on your phone, you could look at it, and then I could send you the emotion that I'm feeling. And when he says massless particles are like, it's sending information that basically is timeless, is what he's saying, is that's instantaneous, is really information that is interpreted the same way by all receiving minds. There's no necessity to communicate context to each other, because the context is, our own sentience. Emotion, we all understand it because we're all sentient. I don't need to explain sadness to you. But if you've never seen a cat before, I need to explain a cat to you. I need to be like, it's kind of like a dog, it's furry, but it's got like a flatter face, and it's not as, it's quieter, and that, I don't know, lives alone. Like, it pushes things off of countertops. Like, I have to explain many aspects of of what a cat is in order for you to even start to conceptualize what it was. And I'd have to explain it to you using concepts that you already also have an understanding of. And the more concepts that I use that you don't have a first person understanding of, and where that you only have a second person understanding of, which means like the context that you understand it is within the context of just language, but not within the context of experience, the less you will actually understand it. This is actually like a huge constraint that my framework seems to predict about, like the limits of what like Neuralink would allow for. You can't just send images to each other. Like, I used to think that you'd be able to do that with chips in your head. You could just send. I could be like, check this out. Look at this weird bird that I see, and I could just send you what I'm seeing. Share screen. It would be like share eyes. Share vision. I don't think that's possible anymore. But sharing emotion that I feel when I see the bird, that I can do, and I think we will be able to do that. This opens up a lot of can of worms about like how these chips can be used to control people as well, as like by controlling what they feel when they are doing certain things, not by changing what they see, but by changing what they feel when they see certain things. That's a danger to Neuralink, but it's also a constraint of Neuralink. Its use is we're still going to need to send pictures to each other to show each other what we're seeing. I can't be like, look at this bug and tell me what it is. People send me like pictures of snakes and lizards all the time that they find. They're like, what kind of snake is this? And I tell them they won't be able to just be like, share eyes. You're still going to need like glasses with a camera or a smartphone with a camera. And I'll need the glasses with a screen in it or a smartphone with a screen in order to see what you're seeing. But you could send me how you feel about it though. We won't. Neuralink will eliminate the use of emojis, but it will not eliminate the need for cameras. That's a prediction that seems to pop out of the constraints of my work. But this also seems to be like what he's talking about is like, what is it, those concepts that are universally understood by all minds that are able to perceive the information that is this concept that's moving through a populace. And the less, if the context that you need to understand it is just your own sentience, you don't need to explain it to anybody. I don't need to explain sadness or pain to my daughter. She understands it because it's part of her experience already. But if I wanted to explain, I don't know, like what, I have no idea. What anything is, like an airplane, if she's never been on an airplane, it's like, okay, it's like a car, but you get inside it and it flies up in the air like a bird. It's like, well, you just used bird and car to explain like this. And, if they need to have an understanding of what those things are in order for that definition to make sense. But all of this is adding to the amount of information that must be communicated in order to transmit the concept. And what's interesting is when he says, okay, this metaphor that he uses of when a photon goes through a glass, it's not that the glass is slowing it down. It's that it's being absorbed by the atom and then sent. Each atom is like absorbing the photon and then re-emitting the photon. And it has to go through all of them. That is literally the same exact thing that happens when I am trying to explain something to you. The more or trying to play the game of telephone, basically. It's like, but imagine trying to play the game of telephone and you're trying to communicate something that not everybody has immediate like understanding of and has to communicate like what is the concept itself. It's not just like telling you a concept that you already have. This adds to the amount of steps that the information must take in order to travel. And this is, it's amazing. I mean, it's such an amazing metaphor, and it's such a true metaphor. And it really bodes like a lot of it gets you thinking about like, what is what will Neuralink allow you to do? How will it allow you to do? What will you have to do in order to like use Neuralink to communicate with each other? What will it get rid of? I used to think it would get rid of the smartphone and glasses. I was like, first it's smartphone, then glasses will replace that, and then glasses and a watch will replace the smartphone, and then Neuralink will replace it all. That is not true. I don't think. Neuralink has some constraints that the other things don't. Like, you look at those emojis and you don't need to be told what each of them mean. You just see like sad face. You're like, I get it. That's what it will be, even more massless than that. It's amazing. It's like music. Like, music is universally understood by everybody. It doesn't require a bunch of extra added steps of information in order to communicate it. This is the type of way, this type of thinking about photons even, and what a photon is, and like really thinking about like, what is a photon? Like, why would some particles be massless and why wouldn't others? Why doesn't the Higgs make sense? You need the context of sentience being fundamental and of interacting sentient beings in order for any of this to make any sense. And this is what was brilliant, as he says, again, another brilliant thing is, when I first started this project, this is a kind of amazing. For me, it's amazing because I never took a physics class. I looked at physics and I looked at the symmetry structures of the standard model, and they lined up with my models of the symmetry structures of mind. Like there's a bunch of different ways your mind organizes information. It differentiates information. It orders it into a causal hierarchy. It categorizes it according to certain properties. These are different metaphysical actions that your mind takes in order to interpret information. And I noticed that the symmetry structures lined up with the standard model, except the Higgs. And I was like, the Higgs makes no sense. I don't understand it. And every time I've listened to anybody trying to explain the Higgs, it does not make sense. Now I do understand why they think it makes sense, but I still think it doesn't make sense still with my framework. And Eric Weinstein says the same thing, that the Higgs is an illusion. When I made many years ago these models of like just me trying to understand the standard model. It's on my website. Models. If you go here, you'll see some of these are very old. So just, it's just working models right here. There's no Higgs that I put here. I have graviton, but graviton, my conceptualization of the graviton is that you're in the graviton. The universe itself is the graviton. It's not a little particle that we're looking for that's responsible for gravity. It's the universe. So this is the graviton. And there's no Higgs because the Higgs doesn't make sense to anybody who is like examining this based on looking at actual symmetry. It's not symmetric. There's a way of making it symmetric by placing it at the center, but that is just the graviton. It's just like a different way of looking at the graviton. And I put that, and this one, I just was copying what, they had, but this one was an attempt at actually like mapping a symmetry structure that made sense. There's no Higgs. Stephen Wolfram is now saying that would be so. The Higgs is, he called it a kludge. I'm guessing that means like a fix, like it's just a placeholder. Kludge. I don't even know what that means. A kludge, an illusory collection of parts to fulfill a particular purpose. That's exactly what it is. It's we don't have an explanation for this, so we're just going to put this here because it seems to make it make sense, but we don't know why it should be there in the first place. It's just that it fills in a gap. But we don't know when the gap is there. We're just going to fill it. And he said it's a kludge. And I made that prediction like 2 days after looking at the standard model, that I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know why that thing is there. Just by looking at the symmetry of it, not even like understanding like the depths of, I tried to understand what they were saying, why they needed it, but it doesn't, it's responsible for mass, but not gravity. Okay. Well, isn't gravity, aren't these usually communicated as the same thing? It doesn't make any sense. And, but Eric Weinstein said this once. I heard him say it, and then he more recently also said it in a talk that's on Brian Keating's channel, and here it is. Do you realize like how big of a physics like blunder this is if we figure out that the Higgs doesn't even exist and it's just it was an error?
Where the mass of the distal structure, do you have some Higgs that's a or something?
Sure, but there's no Higgs. The Higgs is an illusion. If you look at the Yang-Mills sector of the standard model versus the Higgs, it's almost exactly the same. They both have a Klein-Gordon kinetic term.
And now he's using terms that I don't know. But he's not speaking a language I know. That doesn't mean I can't learn it. It just means I don't speak Spanish. But this is, but it didn't stop him from coming to that conclusion. It didn't stop me from coming to that conclusion, and Stephen Wolfram. That is awesome. I do genuinely believe that is an error that we made. that the Higgs is an error. I think Stephen Wolfram's right. It's a kludge. Do you understand the consequences of that being the case? Like, it just shows, like, if that, it means that every physicist who claims that that anybody that would claim that is doesn't understand what they're talking about, doesn't actually understand what they're talking about. And everybody that accepted this just because and didn't ever think, even if you're like, okay, well, the results matched, what they predicted, okay, sure. But like, if you didn't think about, okay, well, it still doesn't really make sense in the first place, but I understand if we need a placeholder, that's what it would need to do. And so they got the results. Okay. But it still doesn't, if you never thought about the fact that like, it doesn't seem to like fit, then like, maybe we should rethink about, maybe we should assume that the context in which you are using to as the basis of your understanding of what physics is not correct. That's a huge thing. Again, I'm not trying to say, oh, I was first or anything. Eric Weinstein was probably first in thinking that. Maybe it was Stephen Wolfram. It wasn't me, that's for sure, but I did do it independently. That's amazing. Cool to see. People ask me all the time, oh, Tyler, what's the prediction of sentient singularity theory? That the Higgs is an illusion and that it's a kludge. That's a prediction of sentient singularity theory. But it also seems to be that of geometric unity and observer theory as well. So I don't know. Whoever won this the Nobel Prize for the detection of the Higgs maybe should give it back. It's amazing. It's awesome to see people like starting to align. It increases our ability to communicate, which is so necessary if we're gonna actually make, like, if it's just one person, even if you're completely right and everybody else is wrong, you will never make progress in changing the narrative, in communicating your ideas either, because you need other people that have the context to start to like intuit what you're saying. And if nobody understands it and you're like, no, doesn't make sense that there's just this thing that exists that we call space and everything has to travel through it and it's just like dragging on everything. It's like, no, let me go back up and say that doesn't exist, and we're inside a sentient being, and it's the communicative process of information that exchanges of these nested and interacting sentient beings that is responsible for the appearance of gravity and drag, and which is like drag of causality. And people are like, dude, you're just introducing a context that is entirely opposite of what everybody else is assuming. So like, you good luck communicating that and convincing anybody. But when other people start to have a similar enough context to where they're intuiting the same conclusions, you're going to start to be able to talk. That is when science, which is a collective pursuit, a societal pursuit over generations and across multiple individuals who are interacting, it's a collective endeavor towards the truth. And it's building on, previous proofs, which requires communication. We are just starting to get to that point in science. Like, this is a huge moment that there's now like at least two very prominent and very capable people in the world of mathematics and physics who are claiming the same thing about a monumental implication. I'm not saying I'm that, because not many people know me. Actually, a lot of people who are involved in this deeply, they do know me, but like, I don't have giant Twitter following. But you don't have to. You need to. My goal isn't to communicate with everybody else in the populace. It's to communicate with the people who are starting to understand this stuff too, like Stephen Wolfram. And they do know, you know. It's very cool. Um, this is the last thing. People ask me, what is the practical application of sentient singularity theory?
Experiments.
And,
If you could,
and I want to say, what is the practical application of understanding the goal of God in creating you, and also your own nature? It's endlessly practically applicable. And I love the question that Brian Keating asks Stephen Wolfram in this. It's great. It's the last question, and we're going to wrap it up.
force the Ruliad to do something or rent out one very dense portion of it to solve one physical problem, one problem in math or physics, what would be the problem that you'd most like to direct the computational firepower, the biggest computational firepower in the universe, perhaps the whole universe? What would you direct it to? What is the most important problem to you right now?
Well, that's a hypothetical that's hard to sort of imagine executing on. I mean, I think that the what's the most important problem? I mean, it's again, there are things I'd like to know the answer to. There are plenty of things, we humans have a certain sort of human experience and existence, and it's it'd be fun, if we talk about what do we want to solve, like human immortality, that would be a fine thing to solve.
Yeah.
Now, I've actually sort of looked at that a bit from a computational point of view. What's actually involved? If what is the foundational thing that's happening in life, in biology, and so on? It's again a big computational irreducibility story, and unfortunately, it makes things look pretty difficult, because it's like if you're thinking about sort of medical kinds of things, you say, okay, we've got this system. It was sort of a piece of computational irreducibility that was adapted to the things that we humans do, and so on. And now let's say you perturb it, you poke it in some way. Well, it does these unpredictable things. And then you say, well, what's the fundamental problem of medicine? It's to, after the thing got poked and started doing the things you didn't expect it to do, can you poke it again and get it back on track? And the whole sort of computational irreducibility story tells you just how hard it is to do that. It's a little bit related to the whole free will question also. If you want to have a rich life, so to speak, that does many things, it's hard to say, let's have something that will kind of persist forever. Because there are things, I mean, we can easily make cell cultures that are kind of tumor cells or something that will persist forever, but we don't think that's a great way to live, so to speak. For us humans, the most obvious sort of big thing would be kind of how do we take, and it's not obvious how that is even sort of conceivable, how do we take the kind of experience that we have, and if you like what's going on, which somebody like me tends to like, it's kind of, you like your life you're living, you kind of want to make that go on as long as possible. And so that's an example of a kind of where you could, but as I say, I think it is a fundamentally computationally difficult problem. I don't think it's one of these things where it's like, we're if you look at sort of what we are constructed out of, we are sort of the sole example of a successful molecular scale computational system. Life is a kind of molecular scale computational system, and it's hard to kind of the things that we do that are our current sort of approaches to medicine and things like that tend to be these very coarse things where you say, just send in that molecule everywhere and hope that it binds to the right things and so on. I mean, we have within ourselves, we have things like the immune system that's a bit more sophisticated at going in and sort of tweaking what's going on. But we're pretty far away from that. But it's not even clear, sort of at a very almost philosophical level, if you sort of achieve immortality, but you achieve it again. It's kind of like when people say, can we adapt AI to do some particular thing? You say, well, you adapt AI. The classic is to make as many paperclips as possible, and then it turns the whole surface of the planet into a paperclip factory or whatever. And the same thing. You want the biological thing that kind of can continue forever. As I say, it's easy to get that, but it's not a good life type thing.
That's right.
So I mean, that would be an example. I mean, I think that
maybe that means that the biological part of this is not what matters. It's the sentient feeling part of this that matters. That's why nobody cares if you pull the plug on somebody who is on a body that's quote unquote brain dead. It's like, because you're not killing anyone at that point, they're already gone. And so it's not about the biology. We should not be trying then to necessarily answer the question, how do we live, how do we make the biological live forever? We should be thinking about even does a sentience ever, what would make a sentience not continue, and what would make a sentience more likely to persist? I would say that according to sentient singularity theory, most of the time, even after you die, your awareness continues. That doesn't mean you still can make changes. You can't. Your ability to make changes is gone. You're no longer embodied. You need a body in order to interact with others. But you are still aware of certain things. You still have feelings. You are still aware of yourself and of others. but your ability to make changes is gone. Maybe sometimes you are intentionally deleted by God. That would be his choice. I think he can do it, but I don't think that that's his. I don't think he makes us in order to, with the goal of deleting us. I think if he has to delete us, it's because of us. We caused ourselves to be incoherent. It's like you don't start writing a paper on your computer with the goal of deleting it. But if for some reason that file gets corrupted and it's no longer making it enough sense to persist beyond, like, once you close it, it cannot be opened anymore because it's not coherent. What do? You have to delete it. Why not? But I think that it's likely for most people that their sentience persists after they die, because the information, the information remains, and what is the context of the information that you accumulate and generate in your life? It's you're the context of it. So that means in order to preserve the information, you have to preserve the context, which is yourself. It doesn't, and we know that our sentience is not linked to space-time. It does not seem to be at all. Where point to your sentience. You can't. And we know this when like I said, when people say, oh, they're brain dead, they're no longer there. It's just the cells are still doing their job, but for now. But there's no one stacked on top of those cells anymore. Okay, if you believe that, then you cannot believe that sentience is just a physical process. It's something else. And our experience backs it up. Like, there's no, I shouldn't even have to argue that with anybody. Like, feel about it. I don't want to say think about it. Feel about it. But here, continue on. He's saying, though, that, like, what would matter is, like, the answer about what we should do if we are here. If it's not about, like, just trying to extend human life forever and live forever, then then what you do matters, And so maybe the answer that you should seek from an understanding any kind of fundamental theory is enough context to understand what you should do in certain circumstances, at least. What we should do. It's like, get married. And that's the start. We all know this, you want to have an impact on others in order to feel meaningful. Like, you want to feel meaningful. You want a life that's meaningful. Nobody wants to just continue on and living forever just because they're experiencing physical pleasure. They're driving their Bugattis and they're taking cocaine, so they want to live forever. No, you always end up depressed. But when my grandma called me, talked about this before, the day before she died, she called me and she said she was dying. She knew it, and she was like super with it though until the very end. The whole time she never like lost her ability to communicate clearly. And she called me up, and I was living in a different state, and she was like, I'm dying and I want to say goodbye. She was like, I don't know if there's a God or heaven. I hope there is, but I'm really glad and grateful that I am leaving behind, that I was able to have a husband and children, and those children had children. And she was basically saying her life impacted others, and that impact was going to continue to grow, not even just persist, but grow. That is what it means to have a generative impact on the world. And you know what? It is my personal belief that even her sentience still persists. She is still aware of some things. I don't know of what, but some things, or at least some ones. And it just makes logical sense when it comes to, like, what is information? It is context. What is the context of all the information that you generate throughout your life? That content, that information is still there, a lot of it. Information doesn't just disappear. Especially if you're inside of a sentient being that is accumulating that information as well. It's not just you. God is aware of what is going on inside of your mind too. He sees that. because, like that information is occurring within his mind. It's not separate from his mind. So it's like that information persists. You are that information. Like there's no difference between you and that information at that point. You are the context of it. Context is information. So I'm not saying I know this for a fact. I'm saying it seems logically inevitable that you are likely to persist, but also that God created, it seems to like the main reason God created someone else, meaning multiplicity of sentience, is meaning. Like, why? Because that's what we want. So, like, maybe we should take actions that maximize our positive impact on others. That's what we should do. That's the main application of a fundamental theory. Most people don't even know what that means when they say, "Oh, I want to understand the universe fundamentally." And even Stephen Wolfram says that. He says that right here. We're gonna go.
There are things. It's always complicated when you ask for things that. Let's say you say, "Well, I'd really like to know the fundamental theory of the universe."
Yeah.
Okay, which I've worked on a lot.
Yeah.
But that's a complicated thing. What do you really mean by that?
Right.
With the Ruliad, we have, in a sense, what I'm pretty sure is the fundamental theory. But making the connection between that and what we humans are kind of what we humans can talk about, can perceive, and so on, that's a different thing, which seems like it's not quite find the fundamental theory. I mean, in terms of things that I'm sort of chasing right now, I'm very interested in sort of experimental implications of the sort of fundamental theory of physics that we have. I've been having fun using LLMs as my kind of collaborators.
That's because sentience is the context of a fundamental theory, and it is the fundamental theory. It is the universally understood and experienced reality by anyone who seeks to understand or does understand anything, and it's also seems to be logically inevitable given the constraints of existence and the definition of existence and the definition of information. And it just seems like that is the context. So it's not just the rules that matter. It's what is responsible for the creation of the rules. Well, it's the relationships between the beings that exist, the beings that you are within, the beings that you are around, the goal of the being that created you. It's like if creation of multiplicity or partitioning of God's sentience into multiplicity of sentience is not something that would happen without it being chosen, that means that like you are here for, like, literally seems to imply that you were here intentionally. Like somebody, God was like, that guy should be here for some reason, and like his will be done. So it's like maybe we should think about these things, and they will lead to understanding why the rules within the Ruliad are the rules within the Ruliad. It's not woo. It's not creationist, propaganda. It seems to be kind of what seems to be implied. Like that's what it seems. I'm just saying. It seems like we're about to experience the return of the God hypothesis. If you found this interesting, please hit the like button. It is too late. I wanted to even look at other clips, but I'm just going to invite you to click and watch their entire talk below. Their talk is much shorter than my commentary. And I will tell you how tall Stephen Wolfram is next week when I meet him in person. So with that, see you, everybody. I guess that might not be funny to everybody, but this is why it's funny, and then we'll go. Stephen Wolfram says, "I always know if I've met somebody in person because of how tall they are."
I know roughly how tall this person is. If the answer is yes, then we met in person. If the answer is I haven't the slightest idea, then we probably never met in person. But we definitely met, and I look forward to meeting again.
Me too, Stephen.
All right. With that, this was great. Thank you to Brian Keating and Stephen Wolfram for having this talk and putting it out. It was my favorite talk I've seen of Stephen Wolfram's, and you should watch it and subscribe to Brian Keating's channel. Definitely also subscribe to my channel if you're not, and please hit the like button and share this. It's way too late. Get some sleep. Peace.